It's time for Twit This Week in Tech. Great panel for you. Owen Thomas is here, managing editor of the San Francisco Business Times and former director of the Stanford Internet Observatory, current CISO at SentinelOne. Alex Stamos will talk about Delta's $500 million lawsuit against CrowdStrike, surge pricing coming to a Walmart near you, and why Elon Musk has been talking to Vladimir Putin all the time. It's all coming up next on Twit.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twit, This Week in Tech, episode 1003, recorded Sunday, October 27th, 2024. CrabStrike. It's time for Twit This Week in Tech, the show where we covers the week's tech news with the smartest people in the business. I've got a great panel for a very important show because we've got an election coming up, and I thought, you know what? If you're gonna get a election coming up, we should probably get somebody who's into disinformation. And of course, Alex Stamos is my go-to guy for all of that. Currently, CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at SentinelOne. We first became aware of Alex when he was at Yahoo and then at Facebook covering security. Zoom brought him in as the pro from Dover when they were getting a lot of heat over their kind of pseudo encryption, not end-to-end encryption. You helped fix that, I know, Alex. And for a long time at Stanford, and this is the reason I wanted to talk to you, at Stanford's Internet Observatory, which was watching disinformation for the last few years. Alex, great to have you back on our show.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Also with us from the San Francisco Business Times, good friend Owen Thompson. He's managing editor there. Thompson's the English Muffins. You're Thomas. Oh, it's great to see you, Owen. Welcome.
As long as you don't call me, who's the actor? Owen Wilson.
Owen Wilson. I will not.
I understand the confusion.
That would be good. I don't know. No. I wouldn't mind being Owen Wilson. Yeah. Lots to talk about this week, and I see that we actually have something that's kind of right up your alley. But before we got too far along, I did want to talk about disinformation. Do you follow this as much as you did? Probably not when you were at SIO, right, Alex?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm still plugged in. I'm still teaching at Stanford. I just taught a class on Friday.
What's the class?
So in the fall, I teach an intro to cybersecurity class for the masters in cyber policy. So you can do a master's in international policy at Stanford, and there's a cyber specialty. So it's the first class for those students. So it's basically teaching lawyers and political scientists how to hack stuff. It's great. You teach a lawyer how to use Metasploit. It's a dangerous thing.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
How fascinating, though. It's funny. In 2016 and 2020, we heard a lot about Russian disinformation and, Russian troll farms and so forth.
Yeah.
This time around, not quite as much, although we are starting to also hear about Chinese involvement. I saw a story that said the Chinese are looking more at down ballot campaigns than at the presidential campaign. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
What is China's interest, do you think, in our election? What would they like?
Okay, so overall, there is more foreign interference in this election than any American election before.
No kidding.
Yeah, including Russian. So the Russian activity is larger. And like you said, everybody else has gone involved, which we have this long history in the cyber world of some country will do something big and spectacular, and then everybody else will copy it, right? You have, the Iranian attacks in the early 2000s and the 2009 Aurora attacks end up being copied by everybody else. You have Stuxnet getting copied. You have the Snowden disclosures laying out a bunch of surveillance techniques that end up getting copied. And so it's the same thing here, that the Russian disinformation techniques from 2016, everybody else around the world looked at that and like, I'd like.
They learned the lesson.
Right, including the Russians, United States, like the U.S.
Yeah, we do it too.
Our team at Stanford has actually written up a number of cases where, unfortunately, the Pentagon has paid for troll farms to do the same thing for countries we don't like, which I think is actually really bad on a number of levels. One, it's like an incredible waste of money. Like the people the U.S. pays for this are incompetent. So it's a big waste of taxpayer dollars, but it's also just incompatible with American ideals. But back to your point, like the Iranians and the Chinese have been massively involved this time as well. And they have very different geopolitical interests than the Russians. While they are aligned in a lot of ways, their goals in the U.S. election are quite different than Russian goals.
The Russians, it's my understanding, wanted to flood the field with garbage, just to destabilize.
Well, that was the big goal in 2016, right? Like the big difference between Russian activity in 2016 and 2024 is in 2016, they didn't have like a big strategic purpose. You see kind of two themes in 2016. The Internet Research Agency, their big theme was to flood the zone with garbage, that their goal was to drive division in the United States. The number one thing they talked about was Black Lives Matter, actually. If you do an analysis of their content, was just to push divisive themes, and they wanted to amplify divisive content. The GRU campaign was meant at harming Hillary Clinton. And that's really, Vladimir Putin does not like Hillary Clinton. He personally blames her for, he believed the State Department under her watch was trying to foment a revolution against him. And he wanted to weaken her. Does that mean he wanted Trump to be elected in 2016? It's very hard to tell like what his purpose was, but he didn't like Hillary. But it wasn't that big of a campaign in 2016. In 2024, Russia is involved in the largest war they have fought since World War II. It is now larger than Afghanistan. They have lost more men than they lost in Afghanistan. They're approaching probably 100,000 dead. They've spent billions of dollars. They've lost a significant portion of, for example, their armored vehicles, a huge number of helicopters and planes. A portion of sovereign Russian soil is being occupied by Ukraine right now. I mean, like, as big of a deal as the Russia-Ukrainian war is to us, it's a humongous deal for them. And so they have a real strategic purpose now for their disinformation that they did not have in 2016. And
are they looking for a candidate who will surrender, basically, stop supporting Ukraine? I think
if you look at what they're trying to do, they really have two goals. One is they want Donald Trump to win, but that's not good enough. The other thing they need is they need to build a base of support in the United States for the idea that Ukraine is an enemy of the United States, and that surrendering this war and pulling all support from Ukraine is in the best interest of the United States, which is an idea that did not exist 2-3 years ago, right? 3-4 years ago, nobody cared about Ukraine, right? Like no American, other than Ukrainian or Russian Americans, with some kind of link to the region.
Before the invasion, you're saying? Before the invasion,
and before this Russian campaign.
Crimea wasn't enough for people to be upset about.
No, back during the Crimean invasion, like, people were not, it was not something that was on people's radar. And that is what, if you look at the Russian activity now, it is about supporting Trump now explicitly, in a way it was not in 2016, where it was much more diffuse. And if it was about Trump, Hillary, it really wasn't about Trump. It was about just weakening Hillary as a candidate.
Right.
And now it is explicitly about inserting the idea in the populist right that it's a good idea to cut off Ukraine. Not just that it's acceptable, but that is the right thing for America. And that has been incredibly effective. And that is why you see them spending millions of dollars. We had this indictment by the FBI of foreign agents who were taking Russian money and giving them to American influencers. Millions of dollars. People were making...
that story got so undercovered.
Unbelievably.
It felt like that was a huge story.
Yes.
That there were podcasters, there were influencers who were, it turns out, on the Russian payroll. Americans.
Yes.
And
I feel like it got mentioned and then just kind of, oh yeah.
And if you think it's just those guys, like, I have a bridge to sell you.
That's who we caught.
Right. Those are the ones who have been caught so far. Right.
Yeah. Owen? Why did we lose interest?
I think it's kind of hard to trace the money trail. I think also Russia is historically very good at exploiting this this category. I believe the term of art is useful idiots.
Yeah.
These are not like, secret agents. These are not people who actually have any contact necessarily with with Russian agents in any form. It's just Russia has identified that if we boost the profile, the influence, the voice of this person, who has, who has these wacky ideas, then that will serve our larger goals. So
Well, it does
and to
seem
be
like
clear,
they've
the
become-
goal with those guys is
Yeah.
they were already big. The goal was they were paying them to talk about Ukraine, right?
Right.
Is that those guys were big about talking about cultural issues, talking about schools, talking about trans issues and the Olympics and like whatever. But the normally people don't care about Ukraine, right? Like it's just not something that is on the radar of the cultural right normally. And so by paying them that money, they could take it from off the radar to making it on the top 5 list of the things that they're going to get angry about in their podcast, in their video, in their newsletter. And that is what has been effective. They've been doing that for years. And so that is, right now, one of the big movies, like, I don't know if you guys seen it, but like, when I open up Amazon Prime, they're trying to show me, hey, there's a big biopic of Ronald Reagan, right? And you can go and like, one of the big scenes is Dennis Quaid getting up there and telling Mikhail Gorbachev to bring down this wall. And so at the same time that we're celebrating Ronald Reagan, the party of Reagan has become pro-Russia.
Yeah.
And so like, if you just take a step back historically, the Russian campaign has been incredibly effective, right? That a humongous chunk of the Republican Party is now aligned and believes Vladimir Putin over a big chunk of the American intelligence agencies and a bunch of American allies and believes that Russia is our ally and that the democratically elected president of Ukraine is actually some kind of dictator and that the Ukrainians deserve to lose a big chunk of their country. And that is why they're paying these people.
I've been watching For All Mankind, which is on Apple TV. It's basically an alternate history of the space race. A great watch if you haven't watched it. But it's fascinating how removed from the kind of Cold War conflict, which is a very central part of that TV series.
Yeah, the Russians get to the moon first in that.
Yes, it's kind of this permanent Sputnik moment.
Right.
And like. Just watching it is a reminder of how warped, as I think Alex has pointed out, the concept of Russia as kind of a global global opponent.
I find that interesting that they have been fairly nimble in taking advantage of new technologies. We were very concerned, for instance, about disinformation created by AI. In this cycle, and Russia has now been accused of being behind a deep fake of Trump ballots being destroyed in the election. They've jumped on the deep fakes, right?
Yeah. I mean, they back in 2016 they were taking videos and images and repurposing them. There's a little bit of photoshopping, but for the most part, what they would do is they take a video of a riot and they would say, look, it's riots in America. And you're like, no, that's actually,
but it wasn't
that was Algeria. Oh, right. Or it's Latin America.
I remember that.
Like, hey, look at the sign, right? Like, there are no American streets. Yeah, right. Exactly. And so, it's deep fakes are now giving them the opportunity to make it just a little bit harder to disprove things and also to generate lots of content when they used to have either find content or they had to have a floor full of photoshoppers and illustrators.
It's just gotten easier.
Right. Now it's a dude with a bunch of RTX 4090s and open source models. Right.
Is the Internet Research Corp, that troll farm is gone, right?
It's gone. Well, Yevgeny Prigozhin's dead. Right. So that's one of the
He was the guy, remember, who went up against Putin and ended up dying in a suspicious plane crash.
Yes. It is amazing the things like if you're against Vladimir Putin, there are a number of things you should not do. Right. You should not drink tea.
Go near a window.
Stand near a window. Fly private. Right. Like there are
just some things.
Yeah.
It pays better not to. So here's the question. I actually asked both of you. Should we be concerned about this? Because, I mean, we know it's happening and there are news headlines about it. Is it, I'll ask you first, Owen, do you think Americans are persuaded by disinformation from China, Iran, and Russia?
I think the danger to society is it's a little more subtle and probably a little more corrosive, which is that people tend to just become coarsened and resistant to any kind of information. In my industry, they talk about news fatigue. People are just kind of tired of it all. They don't want to hear about Ukraine. They don't want to hear about Russia. They don't want to hear about this disinformation problem. Because it's like, okay, well, you're saying information is, you're saying you can't trust anyone. That kind of feeds into people's predispositions, and it also serves probably Russia's and China's and Iran's goals, is to just erode belief in institutions.
You agree, Alex? Certainly that's the case. Although I think some of that is we're just overwhelmed with news, legitimate and illegitimate. We're just sick of it. At least I am, from 24-hour news channels and everywhere you have in your hand, this communicator, even if you're only on Instagram and TikTok, is full of news. So I think I understand why people are a little done. I think there are people listening right now saying, do we have to talk about this? Isn't there a new iPhone or something we could talk about?
Yeah, on elections, there's no good quantitative social science evidence that disinformation has thrown any elections. So
that's
you
interesting.
mentioned, there's been a bunch of studies. Unfortunately, it's quite hard. People have tried to follow panels of people. Like the thing that have been attempted in 2020, 2022, and now that a number of groups are trying in 2024, is they will follow individual voters, look at their preferences, and then also look at what their media content looks like,
right,
and then see whether or not
try to tie
it all together, right? Yes, because it's just very hard for social scientists to look at this big diverse set of things that you look at.
It seems to be almost confirmation bias. Like if you believe something, then you will read the news and see the posts that confirm what you already believe in, right? Does it change people's minds is the question.
But from my perspective, I think if you just take a step back and you look at the big historical, the fact that a big chunk of one of the major political parties in the United States has now decided to back Vladimir Putin in his major geopolitical interest in getting the United States to abandon Ukraine, it looks like it's a victory. Outside of this massive political push, that seems less likely, right? And so he certainly thinks it's successful, and they have massively doubled down, tripled down. Like the investment the Russians are putting in is much larger. And part of that is just the cost. Like if, spending 10, 15, 20, $30 million, $40 million, $100 million.
It's cheap.
It's nothing, right? Like that's losing at the rate at which they're losing tanks and planes and men in this war. Spending $100 million to mess with America's elections, where that is one of the only ways that they might possibly have a victory that is not a negotiated settlement, is absolutely cheap compared to any other outcome.
There is, and I will say this is a conspiracy theory, and I don't know how valid this is, but there are data points. For instance, we've just learned that Elon Musk seems to talk to Putin somewhat regularly, as does Donald Trump. Yeah. We've seen J.D. Vance basically say that who cares if Russia wins in Ukraine? We just need to end it. And it feels like this conspiracy theory is that Donald Trump, because of his age and cognitive difficulty, will probably not be very interested. He wasn't that interested in 2016. Very interested in running the country. That J.D. Vance will be kind of the de facto president. And J.D. Vance, as we know, is Peter Thiel's protege, as is Elon Musk. And there is this conspiracy theory, and I want to really say up front, this is a conspiracy theory, that the technocrats see this as an opportunity to essentially run the country. That the Peter Thiel and Elon Musks of the world say, hey, here's an opportunity in a vacuum to kind of move in. And of course, Vladimir Putin is probably the richest person in the world, not Elon Musk. We don't know how wealthy he is, but he basically controls Russia's oil and gas interests. Has the money to kind of, and it seems to be putting into all of this. Is this nuts, or is this See, this is where I feel like I'm so inundated with information.
Well, it's follow the money, right, Leo?
Follow the money. And unfortunately, money runs our politics.
So Andreessen Horowitz has declared American Dynamism one of its big investment initiatives. What does that mean? It means defense contracting. So you've got a venture capital firm saying, hey, if we can get in good with the government, and Andreessen and Horowitz, the two co-founders of the firm, have backed Trump this cycle, we stand to make money.
Power.
Yeah.
Well, and then you have Jeff Bezos telling the Washington Post not to endorse a candidate. And then immediately that day, Blue Origin, Trump meeting with Blue Origin, it just starts to feel a little back room, smoke-filled room, kind of cozy.
Is
that disinformation working on me, Alex?
In the Stranger Than Fiction department, there's a private space firm in For All Mankind. Sorry to go back to my current favorite TV show, and it's just like you look at that and it's like nothing compared to the reality we're in of SpaceX and Blue Origin being basically NASA's only options.
Right. I mean, this is why you don't want to hear that Elon Musk has been talking to Vladimir Putin on a regular basis, because he essentially controls our aerospace, our space industry, because Boeing has failed.
It did seem like the DOJ put a scare in him.
He was paying $1 million a day to people registering to vote, which turns out illegal. I don't know though.
And the Putin thing's going to be, if the Musk's clearance issue is a serious one.
No kidding.
Like
NASA says they are going to investigate this.
Right. So SpaceX does classified launches for National Reconnaissance Office in the Air Force. That means they have what's called a facility clearance. He is the CEO of SpaceX. I looked into this a little bit. It doesn't look like they have it looks like the Space Exploration Technologies LLC is actually the cleared org. They don't have a separate organization. So sometimes the way you do this is you have a separate company that does federal contracting, and it doesn't look like they do this. It looks like it's the master organization, which means he has to have some kind of clearance. What I've heard is he has a secret, which is not incredibly hard to get. It's probably the best he could do. He's foreign born. He has all these foreign contacts. But even then, with a secret, I think you're still supposed to, it's not as strenuous as with the TSSCI, but you're still supposed to do things like file forms when you have foreign contacts with representatives of foreign governments. I once had I go to this conference called the Munich Security Conference most years. I was at a simulation with a bunch of people, including a guy who used to be in the KGB, which you're never really an ex-KGB agent. Yeah. The form I filled out just from that, being in that room, was 6 pages long. Oh my God. So it's fine. But that's what you have to do if you actually want to follow the rules, right?
Yeah. You have a clearance?
It is at times I've had clearances. Yeah. And so, right. It's something you do. Like if you work in cyber and you do this kind of work,
appropriately.
Appropriately.
Yeah. I think that's completely appropriate.
Right. And
so why isn't Elon Musk doing this, or is he?
Right. And so that's the question. I mean, if he was not filling out a foreign contact form every time he talked to Vladimir Putin, I think probably he's in violation. If he's been doing illegal drugs, he's certainly in violation.
Right.
And so this becomes like a real issue for him in SpaceX, because they cannot maintain a facility clearance, and then it becomes a real issue for the government because it puts them in a very difficult position. Because if he loses that, then they're going to have to have a difficult discussion with SpaceX of whether or not he can stay as CEO. Or
can he stay in the United States? The revelations about his lack of legal status when he started his first company, Zip2, which then allowed him to bankroll what became PayPal, and led to his whole current fortune.
He's a citizen now, right? So I don't think they can denaturalize him for he's outside the.
And you probably can't prosecute him for what is really a minor violation of a student visa.
You have minimal due process when it comes to clearances, which is something they tell you.
Yeah,
right?
That's interesting. Yeah, don't expect. This is different. This is not the legal system.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't have any
Right.
rights, which is what they tell you basically, right? And like you can go to clearancejobs.com, like there's forums about this of people like low-level people who make tiny little mistakes and end up like having to lose their jobs.
That's, by the way, the difference, because they're low-level people.
Yeah.
And it seems to be in this country, if you're a billionaire, you don't have to follow the same rules.
Yeah. And it's getting to the point of where I mean, you talk about this, or you talk about like Trump taking huge piles of TSSCI material into his bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, and it becomes difficult to like then go tell people who work normal jobs at the Pentagon of like, you know, to give them these briefings of like, you're going to go to Leavenworth if you know, take a file folder home, right? Like it's becoming like, I think it's becoming a real problem for the security establishment because the obvious dual treatment of people here is going to make it very difficult to enforce the rules.
So we know what Russians' goals are, and I can imagine what Iran's goals are, right? Are they pursuing kind of anti-Israeli policy or looking for candidates that would support that? Or
so Iran has been attacking Trump, right? So like Iran's goal, Iran is very anti-Trump, and so they went directly. Their activity has been much more like what the GRU's activity was in 2016. They've been using cyber-enabled hack and leak campaigns. So they attacked first Roger Stone in his personal Gmail. And then once they had access to his personal account, they leveraged that to spearfish the Microsoft mailboxes of members of the official Trump campaign, including lawyers who worked for his campaign. And then they got access to a bunch of content.
Were they using the exchange flaw, or that was just pure spear phishing?
No, pure spear phishing. So this had nothing to do with anything more technical than spear phishing. And then Relay, I believe my understanding was they had like the kind of Microsoft Authenticator push to authenticate. So it's the kind of thing that you can man in the middle if you have a reasonably advanced spear phishing setup.
So is Iran as sophisticated as Russia's pretty sophisticated in this, I think.
Right. So the way I would organize this, like the real scary people you really don't want to go against is the SVR, is the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. They are the real scalpel of the Russians, but they're relatively small, right? They probably have a couple hundred people at that top level. The largest and scariest is the Chinese. Like the Chinese have dozens and dozens of different groups that work for the People's Liberation Army, the Ministry of State Security, a bunch of different people security bureaus that work for different cities and states. And those groups are in the thousands. So there's maybe 150, 200,000 people.
And they're good.
They're good. Only a couple of them are at that SVR level. Okay. So the average quality of the Chinese hackers is less.
So they make it up in volume.
But they make up in volume. Right. And so that is like from an overall scope perspective, the Chinese can go after way more targets at once. Right. And they have way more breadth of attack. The
Politico
Iranians,
reported day before yesterday that the Chinese were hacking the telecoms of the Trump-Vance campaign.
Yes.
And by doing so, got the communications data from roughly 40 people in the campaign. And the DHS is reviewing that right now.
Right. And so that's part of what people have been calling the typhoon attacks. So it looks like this is either PLA or Ministry of State Security. We don't have direct attribution. Probably PLA, People's Liberation Army, has a number of hacking units.
Right.
And so
Salt Typhoon was the group that invaded Verizon's call center, right?
Right. Yeah. In this case, what they're doing is they're going after the systems the telecom companies have used for lawful intercept. So if you're
this is Kalia. This is the hysterical thing. And Ron Wyden talked about this, saying, "Look, we passed Kalia in the 90s, right? To support lawful wiretapping." But unfortunately, this backdoor into Verizon, AT&T, Lumen turned out to be hackable.
Yep.
Because anytime you put a backdoor in something, guess what? Bad guys might get it. And they did. And Wyden's saying this is exactly why we can't backdoor end-to-end encryption. Because Kalia, Louis Freeh was the head of the FBI at the time, said, "Oh, no. This will be completely safe. We got this covered." No.
it means you have to build a back door that's wired into one place, and it also has to be easy enough to use that lawyers can use it, right?
Well, there's your problem right there.
Right.
I see.
Yeah. So the Chinese in this case have been breaking into the telecoms, and then, yes, they could go break into individual switches and routers and SS7 equipment at Verizon or AT&T.
SS7 is still broken, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still broken.
It will never be fixed, will it?
I'm not a telecom expert, but I think
it's in so many phones.
It's on your phone, right? Like
it's on my phone.
These things still have like full SS7 stacks that they're emulating to,
and it has known vulnerabilities. It's
right. It was never really meant. I mean, it was never meant to be expanded outside of like AT&T, right? Like it was meant for them to talk internally. I mean, my grandfather was like an AT&T engineer.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, he was born a goat herder, died an AT&T engineer, which is like a pretty cool path, right?
Wow, a Greek immigrant.
Cypriot, yeah, Cypriot.
Nice.
Yeah, from the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. But yes, he was using SS7 by the end of his career. So that shows you how old it is, right?
It's ancient.
It's ancient. But anyway, so they were using it to spy in a number of cases. But you can imagine how powerful a technique that is. If you can get to Verizon or AT&T's internal interface, you can wiretap anybody, right, in the United States.
Well, in fact, and it's not just the Trump-Vance campaign. They also, according to the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post, attacked staffers to Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, and Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah. If you have that capability, you're going to use it.
So what's the Chinese interest? I would imagine the Chinese don't like Donald Trump very much because of the tariff thing, right? So the Chinese interest, as you mentioned before, is a level below. There's no good evidence of them getting directly involved in the presidential election this cycle. What they're doing is, one, they're gathering intelligence, right? So they are providing intel up to their political leaders to get ready for whoever the president is. So that is just the normal. So they're not trying to throw the election; they're just trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
Right. Neither party is great for China right now, and I don't.
In fact, Trump has recently said, "Well, let's get rid of the CHIPS Act," which is one of the things that keeps us from exporting our technology to China.
Right. He also threw Taiwan under the bus. He gave this crazy speech where he's like, well, they stole our semiconductor industry.
Oh,
and then
Lord.
TMSC's stock dropped like immediately.
Yeah, because maybe, what am I saying about tariffs? It's really about Taiwan in the long run, isn't it?
Right.
The Chinese want to know who's going to let us take Taiwan.
Right. And so they just want to know, but they are getting involved at the congressional level, which is, I think, where they can have more influence, right? You've got, instead of
the down ballot
tens
campaigns.
of millions of people voting.
Yeah,
you have hundreds of thousands of people
Much
voting.
easier,
right? Because some of these elections are a couple thousand people, a couple hundred people maybe are swinging it. And you have a lot less people paying attention. So, a couple hundred fake accounts, a couple influencers in a local election, maybe you have a member of Congress, you have a really close election, Republican or Democrat, either side, you might have somebody who's really anti-China and somebody who's just neutral. And in that case, maybe they don't have to be pro-China, they just have to not care so much, right? And in that case, you target the one who's anti-China, who is on, there's a couple of anti-China committees. There's a couple of committees that have been pushing, really looking into Chinese influence, really looking into microchips and AI and such. You target the person who's on the other side. If every year you can knock off 1 or 2 or 3 members of Congress, slowly, that would have significant impact. And I think that is the Chinese model here. Iran, they don't like Donald Trump, and they're trying to blackmail Trump. And that when you asked about Iranian hacking, they are technically less sophisticated than Russia and China. They are very good at social engineering. And that is how they've made up for it, is that they know they cannot go build the O-Days in the same way the Russian and Chinese. They're not going to be building O-Day iPhone kernel exploits in the same way that Israel or Russia or China can. But what they can do is they've gotten very, very good at tricking people into clicking links. They've built very good phishing campaigns. They've gotten very good at building relationships with people and convincing them to give up their passwords, to click yes on 2-factor prompts and the like. And that's exactly how they got into the Trump campaign.
I want to take a little break. We're this is interesting stuff, and I'm glad we got you on. Alex Stamos is here. He is currently CISO at SentinelOne, which is a great security firm, relatively new in the industry. but doing a great job protecting people all over the globe. Also with us, Owen Thomas of the San Francisco Business Times. Have you voted yet, Owen?
I actually have not. My ballot is sitting on my desk at home, waiting to fill out. I'm a vote at home, drop it off the day of kind of guy.
It is kind of fun to go to the polling station. And
Yeah, that way,
poll workers. I like that feeling. Yeah,
that's kind of best of both worlds. California has let you do that for many years. I
do want. So I have voted by mail. I really do want a switch I could set on my phone that says, I already voted. Stop sending me texts, because I'm at this point, give once and you will be hearing from them forever. So I've donated to campaigns, and as a result, they have my phone number. It's public record, I guess.
And a lot of spam. I mean, a lot of scam,
so much.
Like, if you give to any campaign, I get a lot of give for Kamala, and you look at the links, and it is not for Kamala. It is not.
Well, that's what I think. A lot of it might be. It's
just fraud.
It's fraudulent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of suspect sometimes that is.
Right. It's votedemocrats.nigeria is not, it turns out.
Hey, the Nigerians care, okay? Let's not... Anyway, we'll have more in just a little bit. I actually want to talk about, this is old news, but I still want to get your take on this, Alex. The beeper plot. I thought that was... the reason it comes to mind, John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, recently in an interview said, that was great. That was really cool. Putting plastic explosives in the beepers of Hezbollah leaders. And when somebody said, one of the people killed by it was a child, he said, well, it's her father's fault for letting that evil into the house. What it does raise is some real concerns about our supply chain. If this is possible, that is very scary. We'll talk about that and a lot more. We've got some other stories too. We might even get to talk about, I don't know, new Macs, maybe. We'll see. I know that's why you really tune in. You're watching This Week in Tech. Our show today brought to you by, actually, speaking of security, Shopify. I love a Shopify. Let me tell you something. My son has created, I'm very proud to say, a Shopify store, the Salt Lovers Club. That and I should also say I'm an investor in the Salt Lovers Club, just to disclaim it, where he sells salt and is going to sell pickles and some other stuff, and it was made so easy by Shopify. So I have a real soft spot for Shopify. When you think about businesses, big businesses whose sales are just going through the roof, I don't know, companies like Untuckit, one of our sponsors, and Allbirds, I'm wearing them right now. You might be thinking, oh, it's an innovative product. It's a progressive brand, brilliant marketing. But what is often overlooked, whether it's Hank's Salt Lovers Club or my Allbirds right here, is the businesses behind the business that make selling for shoppers buying easy. That technology is critical. And for millions of businesses, including, I might add, Allbirds, Hank, Salt Lovers Club, Untuckit. Yeah. They're all powered by Shopify. I love Shopify. I was looking for the bell. Nobody does sales better than Shopify, home of the number one checkout on the planet. You won't believe how many companies, big and small, use Shopify. And the not so secret with ShopPay, Shopify's payment system, that boosts conversions up to 50%. Way fewer carts going abandoned, way more sales being made. Let's hit it again. Yeah, that's the sound you want to hear. So if you're growing your business or just getting started, or your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are. Scrolling or strolling. Yeah, that's right. Not just on the web, but brick and mortar, in the stores, in their feeds, and everywhere in between. It's powered so many great businesses. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds uses, that my son, Salt Hank, uses. Sign up for your $1 a month trial period right now. Shopify.com/twit. That's all lowercase. Go to Shopify.com shopify.com/twit. Upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/twit. Hit it. Oh, I love that sound. Shopify. I like doing ads for a company that I really believe in. And boy, I'll tell you, I'm just watching. Hank made the right choice when he started to go with Shopify. So I'm very happy to be able to talk about them on the show. We are talking about the week's news with some very smart people. Alex wants to get in the. Do you want to get in the Discord, Alex, so you can talk to people? We should mention that we are streaming now. This is our new thing on 8 different platforms. So yes, Discord, that's where our Club Trip members live, but youtube.com/twit/live, twitch.tv/twit, x.com, and usually, unless Gary Vaynerchuk is streaming on X, usually we are at the top of your x.com front page. Let me just see, because we often have more people streaming than anybody else. Let me see. Well, wait a minute. I'm
just trying to see all the horrible things people were saying about me.
People love you. Like, are you kidding?
It's just it's the best way to feel like neurotic in real time.
Well, but the thing is, there's not just Discord. We get chat from YouTube. We get chat from Twitch. We're on TikTok too. We get chat from TikTok. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook, and we are on Kick. So I think that's all 8. So yeah, people are watching live. 1,000. I see the number here. 1,134 people watching live. Now that's a fraction of the total, but I think it's cool to have a live audience watching and commenting. So we'll send you
my chest hair if I knew it was going to be a lot more people live.
Button your shirt. Button your. We'll send both. I usually send everybody the Discord link. We give you complimentary memberships, of course.
Or I could have gone really Greek. I should have had chains and gone.
Yeah, and a little cornu. And so you're Cypriot. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Cypriot in Greek. Yeah, the Stamatopoulos is from the Peloponnese, but my mom's side's from Greece.
Yeah,
or from Cyprus.
I have good friends who he lived in. He's a doctor. Lived in Cyprus for some years, and they love Cyprus. They just love it, and they say you gotta go. I say, isn't it war torn? They said, not anymore.
It's not war torn, but my family's from the side that. Yeah, my family's from the side that you can't go to anymore. I mean, I guess I could visit, but my family was driven out by the Turkish invasion. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I do want to take my eldest is named after a monastery there. So
that's
take
neat.
him one day. Yeah.
Yeah, he should see it. The family estate. Where did the Thomases come from?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
the goat farm. That's what I'm talking about.
My mom visited in 1968, a little bit before the invasion, and they still in 1968 they had no running water, they had no electricity. It was outhouses and burning wood. So yes,
but were they happy? But were they happy? That's the question. No,
my grandfather couldn't. He got the hell out of there. So
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I love his story. That's fantastic.
Yeah, America. Yeah,
America.
And then when I did that security clearance, I had to go list every member of my family who wasn't born in the U.S. And he remembered the day he came to America, the day of his naturalization, his serial number from the U.S. Army. He didn't have to look up a single thing. I'm like, I didn't actually need all those things, but I didn't tell him. I'm just writing it down.
He knew it all.
Because he knew it off the top of his head. He was just incredibly proud to be like, I'm an American, and I'm going to prove to you so that you can tell people. Yeah.
Well, that's what I want to, that's the thing. I mean, whoever you vote for, whatever you think of either candidate, we should be proud of being in this country and the right to vote and exercise that right to vote.
Yeah.
And also kind of defend against disinformation and an attempt to subvert our democracy from other countries. Is North Korea a threat in any way?
Not from a disinformation side, from a hacking side. They're quite good. They're probably the largest thieves of Bitcoin in the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So something that's super unique about their state hacking apparatus is, most of the state hackers in the world are all L, no P in the P&L, right? Like, NSA Cyber Command, we pay them with our taxpayer dollars to hack on behalf of the national interest. They are not meant to make money. But the North Korean hackers are meant to be profitable. And in fact, they are humongously profitable. They generate billions of dollars a year.
Well, they need hard currency.
Yes.
But can they convert that Bitcoin to dollars? I mean, is there?
It's an interesting question of how do they spend the Bitcoin, and they do. Yes, they do. They do spend it. There have been a number of DOJ indictments about both the theft and then the laundering. But they have been able to spend the Bitcoin directly to buy some of the things they need, and in some cases turning it into dollars and euro and yen and yuan. Right, so they spend some of it in China. But yes, Bitcoin has been fantastic for the North Koreans.
I thought Bitcoin was illegal in China. You can't spend it in China. Didn't they ban Bitcoin?
Yes. I mean, yeah, sure.
I love that answer.
I mean, there's a bunch of things.
They did. Yeah.
I mean, there's a bunch of things that it's illegal to sell to North Koreans from China. I'm sure they're like Chinese smugglers are not,
they'll take Bitcoin. Sure.
Taking Bitcoin, right? And
they'll take whatever
South
you got.
Korean smugglers, people who are like illegally crossing the LOC to bring stuff to North Korea are taking whatever, probably better taking Bitcoin than like, soggy, yen or whatever, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the North Korean currency is, but I doubt that it's widely accepted worldwide.
Not something you can walk into a Chase with and deposit. Yeah.
The fascinating thing, and Alex, you can correct my technical knowledge here, but people think of Bitcoin as anonymous and untraceable, and that's half correct. It's actually quite traceable through. Transaction by transaction.
It's all in the blockchain. That's the whole point.
It's
not at all anonymous. Yeah, it's not at all untraceable. It's very traceable.
And there are in fact companies like Chainalysis that make a whole business of this. And I think maybe North Korea has gotten more sophisticated about this, or maybe they're just kind of willing to pay this cost. But their use of Bitcoin has given intelligence agencies that exploit this blockchain intelligence, some insight into those operations, and it's an interesting trade-off, I guess, for North Korea. Is that there are obvious advantages with using Bitcoin, but I don't think they quite realize how much they're giving away by using it.
Yeah, I think they know. They just don't care, right?
They don't care. What are you going to do? Come get them?
Chainalysis is great. They give our students free 90-day licenses. So my colleague at Stanford, Shelby Grossman, she teaches a class, an open source intelligence class, and she gets these licenses and teaches our students how to trace transactions.
Just to be clear, you can trace all the transactions, but all you have from Bitcoin is a long identifier, a long number.
Right.
That isn't necessarily tied to any person, right?
Right. So you have to do something else then to tie it to a person.
Yeah. I mean, if they create a custodial wallet somewhere on Coinbase and use their real name, we know, right? We can tie it.
For example, if there's a ransomware attack that is, where the software can be tied to a North Korean group, and then what that wallet address is, where they're collecting, collecting.
Then it's going to North
That's
Korea.
how they. Alex, is that a good way to kind of describe how you make those connections?
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So, that kind of tracing happens all the time for a ransomware actor, does a ransom, it gets moved into a temporary wallet, it then gets moved into intermediate wallets, and you trace it until the final beneficial owner. And then you assume that beneficial owner is a member of that ransomware crew. Or, that's the kind of thing, or yes, it gets moved, it gets tied into a self-hosted Bitcoin D that you can tie it to. This was on a virtual machine, and you're able to tie that virtual machine to somebody who actually physically had access to it.
Did you guys watch the Money Electric documentary on Colin Hoback's documentary on Max about Bitcoin and about the purported identity of Satoshi Nakamoto?
No, I saw the proof, and the proof is like...
It's pretty weak.
Yeah, because it's like a reply guy was just kind of jerking her reply. It's like, that's just how people talk online.
Watch the documentary, because at the end, he confronts Alan Back and Peter Todd. He thinks Todd is Satoshi. I think the two of them are Satoshi. He confronts them in a I think a abandoned Croatian factory, and Todd asks very squirrely. I mean, if you were Satoshi, you would not want anybody to know that, because Satoshi, as far as we know, still controls billions of dollars in Bitcoin, the original coins that were mined, and that mean you would be prime for kidnapping. In fact, Peter Todd, the guy fingered by Hoback, is now in hiding.
Yeah.
And what we're waiting for is any movement in those early coins, those early wallets, because, I guess he'd be smart not to touch them at any point.
Yeah.
That's
Right,
the
but
irony of it's an
can't use
untouchable fortune. Yeah.
Yeah. It could be worth trillions. If the Bitcoin gets to $1 million, it'll be worth $1 trillion.
But if somebody touches them, Bitcoin price massively drops.
Right. Well, you could take
craters.
$1 billion out. It wouldn't kill it.
Well, but if you touch it, then it effectively, I mean,
Means
the
you
current
control
price
it.
of Bitcoin
Right.
is currently assumes that a bunch of that is not
Right.
tradable, basically.
So there's
right?
an interesting point that Hoback makes in the documentary, which is there is a way to burn Bitcoin in public, to burn it on the blockchain so that it cannot be used.
Yes.
Which Nakamoto never did. Either he died before he could do that, or he
Lost his
doesn't.
keys.
He's still around, and he says, maybe someday I'd like to take a little bit of that out, knowing that it would destroy his invention, right?
Right. Or he
Peter
lost
Todd's-
the keys, right? I mean, there's a
Or
possibility.
he lost the keys. I mean,
Right,
I
that, like,
that's
yeah.
right. Yeah.
I mean, this was a theory that people threw around of like, what if it was like a government project or something? Like, let's say
that's
it was,
interesting.
I mean, I don't believe this, but let's say it was like a project of 5 people working at, ASD or NSA or something, and then they got found out by their government masters who are like, that's government property, right?
Right.
And that gets put. Those people no longer have access to it, and it's in a government vault somewhere. It's next to the Ark of the Covenant, and now nobody can touch it. That's a possibility. I think it's. I mean, to me, it is most likely. I think it's very unethical to point out that it's any individual person unless you're 110% sure, because you are putting that person's life at spectacular risk. It's not a theoretical risk, right? Like,
No.
People have been kidnapped. People have been killed over Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Like,
So in a way, that would be unconscionable. On the other hand,
right. And if something happens to these guys, like,
you did it.
You did
it's
it.
your fault.
Right.
On the other hand, there is a reasonable interest in the Bitcoin community over Satoshi, if he's still alive, and whether he controls those coins and what he might do with them, because he is the sword of Damocles hanging over the entire Bitcoin operation.
yeah.
So I don't know. United States Supreme Court declined to take on a case. The government does have 69,370 Bitcoin it got from the Silk Road, worth $4.38 billion. The Supreme Court decided not to hear the case that could clear the government to sell that Bitcoin, which I thought was kind of interesting. In other cases, courts have said, the government can sell the Bitcoin.
Yeah,
So,
they've actually sold a bunch. They sold it pretty cheap. Holding on to it would have been good.
just hold it, man.
Yeah.
Diamond hands. I have lost the password to my wallet where my 7.85 Bitcoin reside, and I'm going to wait.
No.
Well, I figure
Is that software wallet or hardware?
it's a Bitcoin Core software wallet. It's RSA encryption. I did not use RoboForm. Don't send. I get email every time I mention this. Pardon me?
What kind of RSA is it?
I don't know what kind of encryption. It's strong encryption, obviously, but it's Bitcoin Core. But I'm figuring it's just a way of holding it. And when quantum computing comes along, I'll crack it, and then it'll be worth some. I might be dead, long dead. What do you think? What do you think? Quantum decryption of Bitcoin passwords. When do you think that's going to happen?
Okay, so if you have a symmetrically derived key, I hate to break it to you, but quantum only gets you.
Oh. Yeah,
right.
I think
It
it's
only
symmetric.
makes it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't actually get you much.
Yeah, I think
It
it's
only gets, like,
128
AES
bit symmetric key.
Yeah, so it doesn't.
So I'm
get
screwed.
You much. Quantum gets you a lot for the asymmetric algorithms, which is why.
So it's interesting because
which is a real problem a big problem for Bitcoin.
Chinese researchers this week said, we were able to crack some encryption with. They didn't. It was a bad headline, I think. They were able to do some quantum computing factoring, but I don't think it was anywhere near enough. I think it was 22 bits. I don't think it was near enough to. We were talking about North Korea. The other North Korean story we've been talking a lot about on Security Now with Steve Gibson is they have been planting hackers in American companies by persuading Americans to lend them their identity.
Yeah.
and then working in these companies as Americans, but with access, of course, to all of the company's secrets.
Although most of it does not seem to have been for access to secrets. It's just to make money.
Money.
Because a lot of it is not.
To make, like the salary.
It's to make the salary, yeah.
Wow.
And so the FBI's busted a couple of these people, and you'll have an American whose identity's been used for 10, 15 companies, and they'll have like 15 laptops in their apartment, and each one's got like TeamViewer on it. And then there's 15 people in North Korea who are doing their jobs.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's a bunch of different jobs. So it'll be like some of them are graphic designers, some of them are remote programmers, some of them, they're all knowledge jobs and things that are like, you don't have to be in a lot of meetings for, right? Because that's where you run into trouble. So it'll be things that are like, or it'll be kind of temp work stuff, data entry, things like that.
Yeah.
Or do they have the American pretend to be the worker?
The American, right? So the American will do the interview, right? So the American will do the interview, and one of the things you can look for is if it looks like the person is getting prompted. So they'll do the interview, and the North Korean person will be listening into the Zoom interview and prompting them with the answers. Like if there's a programming interview or something. So if somebody's doing it and it looks like maybe they're reading off the screen, or it takes them a while to answer it, if it's like a weird back and forth, that's one of the warnings you can look for. The other thing technically you can look for is like if you're shipping laptops to somebody and then you get like a TeamViewer installed or an AnyDesk or something like that, because they have to use a remote desktop tool. If you're hopefully not allowing to bring your own device, right? So if they're on you should not be allowing remote desktop tools installed on your devices. But that's another. There's a bunch of technical things you could be looking for. But it has been actually a real challenge, and it's a good demonstration of a bunch of different kind of control failures in a bunch of organizations. And some really big companies have been hit. I'm not at liberty to say, but you'd be shocked at the companies that have been hit with this.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
Really big companies.
Oh,
Fortune 50.
Jeez. But it's funny, they're not trying to hack it. They're not trying to put in ransomware or exfiltrate information. They just want a job. They just want to make a living. Are they quality? I mean, are they good employees? Do they do a good job?
In a lot of cases, yeah, they're actually doing a pretty good job.
So no harm, no foul. Well, maybe there is. Okay, there's a little harm, but we do have an embargo, I'm sure, against that. But
it seems like the problem would be getting the dollars out of the country and to whatever. Once
again, it's Bitcoin, right? So that person's getting paid. Mm-hmm. They're getting 10, 15 paychecks. And then they're using cryptocurrency to get the money out of the country.
Wow.
Got it.
Well, I said I was going to ask you about the supply chain attack. A brilliant. You have to admire the skill and the tenacity that it took for the. I don't know if it was the Mossad or the IDF, but for the Israelis to put explosives in these pagers and to get them distributed to the leadership at Hezbollah, and then to blow them up, killing hundreds. It is a kind of a terrorist action, I'll be honest, in my opinion. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania said, good on them. But it's also scary because it shows you that a determined opponent can really screw you over by suborning the supply chain.
One thing that played in Israel's favor, as I understand it, and I'm just reading the same reports that you probably have, is that because of sanctions, Hezbollah's options for acquiring technology like these pagers were kind of limited, and it makes them a little vulnerable to this kind of action.
The reason they went to pagers is because they knew the Israelis had cracked the phones using probably SS7.
Well, and also because with the phones, you have a two-way connection, right? So with the pagers, it's like not a modern pager. It was like the old, I think, 700 megahertz. So broadcast only, right? So they moved to a pager because those pages are sent out unencrypted to everybody, and the pagers never go up. They only receive. And so that's why they were using these pagers, because you couldn't be tracked with them in theory.
Wow.
They're not IP based. They weren't. Right. They didn't have like a GSM or LTE connection. They were receiving these old style. They don't work in most countries, I think. And so that's why they ordered them, which made it also, I think, much easier for the supply chain attack to happen, because the number of people who are ordering this kind of pager is extremely small.
How worried should we be about a vulnerable supply chain? I mean, we talk all the time about the Chinese being opponents, and yet almost everything we buy is made in China.
For cyber attacks, I think we should be very worried. And that's why
we forbid Huawei equipment in the United States.
Right. And so targeted cyber attacks, those have happened. And I am aware of there's a bunch of cases that have not been publicized where it's generally at the firmware level, right? So a device that is being ordered by a company where it is known by the OEM that it's going to a specific company, right? So it's not being bought out of and that's what's true here, right? So like the key thing you have to be thinking about if you're worried about this kind of level of adversary is you want to be buying out of the channel. So if you're going to CDW and they've got a warehouse full of computers that were made in China, you're probably fine, right? But if you're ordering directly from the factory and you look at the shipping manifest and it's like shipping started in Shanghai, then you might have a problem, right? The problem could start with the company, or it could start with it getting intercepted. And again, the United States doesn't have clean hands here. There is, in the Snowden documents, there's a picture of, with their faces blurred out, of NSA employees in polo shirts, very carefully unwrapping a Cisco box and then changing out the firmware, right? That they knew. So the U.S. was doing this a long time ago. I mean, that was over a decade ago. So the odds that the Chinese are doing it is basically 100% if the U.S. was doing it a decade ago. So yes, I think it's absolutely something we should be worried about.
Wow.
I think explosives, probably not so much.
Right.
But
hardware hacks, remember the super micro motherboard story that Bloomberg never was able to prove?
Right. And that's the problem is that like they wrote this bad story that
you think it was a bad story at the time?
I mean, it was silly of like, a grain of rice thing. Like that's not how you would do it, right? Like if you wanted to backdoor a super micro motherboard, there's 20 or 30 places on that motherboard where state is stored. You don't need to add a new piece of hardware, right? You would replace one of those pieces of state that already exists in
right.
one of the EEPROMs that already existed in the firmware that already exists.
Right.
And so that's
it's essentially a man-in-the-middle attack, though, right? You're not accusing, say, somebody like Supermicro of perpetrating. It'd be some supplier, somebody who got a hold of the motherboard.
I don't think it's like an official somebody at Supermicro. It could be an employee at Supermicro.
Well, that's true.
Who's been
could be a North Korean employee, right?
Yeah. Or it could have been. It's got to go through a lot of hands when it ships through, and every box that leaves China goes through customs, right?
Right.
You know this, like when you order something, sometimes it says waiting in customs, right? It says it right there in like the FedEx manifest when you buy an Apple computer. It'll say waiting in customs, maybe for a couple days. And so it's absolutely a concern. And companies that really are concerned about this kind of stuff, that's why you buy it from the channel. That's why you buy it, again, from a CDW or somebody who bought 5,000 and they put it in a warehouse. In fact, at one of my previous employers, we bought a device that we were suspicious about, that there was some weirdness about it. And so we ended up going to, I think, Ingram Micro, somebody like that. And we ended up like going and saying, we want that one. We just pointed on like a pallet and we're like, we just picked out a random one from a pile because that way nobody could have possibly known that was the one that was coming to us. So if you're playing at that level where you're being targeted by state actors, that's not an unreasonable thing to be thinking about.
Wow.
But for the explosive stuff, like, yes, I mean, that's a
little harder to do, obviously.
It's a little harder to do. And like the level, like if you're playing at that level, like if you're a terrorist group and people are willing to blow you up, then you have to be worried about it. I think, the only people who are playing at that level who realistically have that threat are probably terrorist groups.
Well, that's okay. Well, then I don't have to worry. So it's okay.
Do you, Leo?
Jeez. Oh, it's only terrorist groups, and we can relax. We can sleep easy.
Well, I do think we have to worry, not about hardware, but like the software spillover. I think there have been examples of malware that's been
that's
targeted at
sure.
Alex, I'm thinking of the incident where malware that was targeted at the Iranian nuclear program got out in the wild and affected a lot of other equipment.
Okay, so it didn't directly affect equipment, right? So Stuxnet was actually very carefully built. There's a quote by somebody of like, it was clear that Stuxnet was a American malware because it was clearly malware built by lawyers. It had lots of checks in it to make sure it didn't damage. Siemens PLCs were the final target, and Siemens PLCs are used in everything. So it was very carefully built to not break anything but that. But the problem about releasing a piece of malware like that is the difference between a cyber weapon and a normal weapon is a cyber weapon can be repurposed and used against the person who shot it at you, right? You shoot a rocket at somebody, they can't turn around and shoot that rocket back. But if you use a cyber weapon against somebody, they can just take it apart and use it against you. And that's, for a short period of time, the only people who had those exploits were the United States, maybe Israel, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They didn't know it, the Iranians, but if they had looked closely, they had some really hot exploits that they could have used if they had been a little more careful.
Why did they not know?
They weren't looking carefully enough, and they were not. They did not figure it out. They thought air gapping was enough, and that's what in that time frame that was kind of the conventional wisdom.
Those SCADA devices were air gapped, but what did they use? They used USB keys. They candy dropped them.
There's a bunch of different theories. One of the theories is that they infected. They attacked a bunch of Farsi language websites and infected them, and so somebody got their personal iPod or something infected, took it in and plugged it in locally.
Wow.
There's also discussion that might be a cover, and that the Dutch actually had a human intelligence asset who planted it, and that whole thing was just a cover for the human intelligence asset.
That's interesting. Wow, that's quite a story. Kim
Zetter's written all about this. That she has a whole.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, some really good coverage. It's a fascinating story. We're going to take a break. We have Alex Stamos with us, formerly of the Stanford Internet Observatory. Now he's the CISO at SentinelOne. We'll talk a little bit about SentinelOne later because we're going to get to CrowdStrike in a minute. And they do kind of a similar thing. But what did you say? SentinelOne's the one that didn't destroy the airline industry. Is that it? I think.
You said it, Leo.
I said it, not you.
I'm thinking it.
Owen Thomas you're thinking it, but you're not saying it because you're a good guy. Owen Thomas is also here, managing editor of San Francisco Business Times, which also has never hurt the United States airline industry in any way, shape, or form, I believe.
Not that we know of.
Not that you know of. I have some great stories, actually, from Owen. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But first, a word from our sponsor, Veeam. When I found out about Veeam, when I talked to the guys at Veeam, I thought, why doesn't everybody use Veeam to protect themselves from ransomware? Your data is the most important thing in your business. Without your data, your customers' trust turns to digital dust. That's why Veeam's data protection and ransomware recovery ensures that you can secure and restore your enterprise data wherever and whenever you need it, no matter what happens. We call this data resilience. And as the number one global market leader in data resilience, Veeam is trusted by, this is a telling statistic, over 77% of the Fortune 500. Use Veeam to keep their businesses running when digital disruptions like ransomware strike. And then the 23% who don't, you're going to see them in the headlines, right? That's because Veeam lets you back up and recover your data instantly across your entire cloud ecosystem, no matter where it lives. With Veeam, you can actually stop ransomware before it bites you, proactively detect malicious activity. Also, and very important, you remove the guesswork by automating your recovery plans and policies. You do have a recovery plan and policy, right? Right? Get real-time support should the worst happen from ransomware recovery experts. Data, it's the lifeblood of your business, so get data resilient with Veeam. VEEAM. Go to veeam.com, VEEAM.com to learn more. We thank Veeam so much for supporting the show, and we thank you for supporting the show by going there and visiting them. And if they ask, say, I saw it on Twit. Veeam. I like the phrase "malware made by lawyers." I might make that the title of this show. I think I'd never heard it quite described, Stuxnet quite described that way, but that's
not my line. I don't know who said it.
It's a good line. Well, we'll steal it. I don't mind. I steal from the best. Actually, one of the stories that's been going around this week is the expulsion of Russian maintainers from Linux. And Linus Torvalds, this is from the Registers, defended that, saying, look, there's an embargo. If you haven't heard of Russian sanctions yet, he writes, you should try to read the news someday. And by news, I don't mean Russian state-sponsored spam. So he says, I'm Finnish. You think I'd be supporting Russian aggression? But there are quite a few people saying, those maintainers, Russian or not, were contributors. They contributed great stuff. They have now been, a handful of Linux developers have been removed from the maintainers file. The explanation was remove some entries due to various compliance requirements. They can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided. Is this a fair move? There's been some criticism of Linus and the maintainers.
I mean, if it's open source, you can inspect their contributions and
I agree.
Decide for yourself, right?
Right. And just because somebody's Russian doesn't mean that they're, bad. I mean,
but when you bring up compliance, I think that means that companies are looking through their software supply chain and maybe saying, hey, free open source or not, we can't have this. We can't run our business on the software.
Right. What do you say, Alex? You agree? You agree with the move?
Yeah, I don't really understand it. So.
Yeah, why now, for instance?
Why
the sanctions are 2 years old.
Right. I can't put my finger on a sanction requirement to not allow Russians to contribute to open source.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of sanctions that are very hard to apply to any kind of open source or free service. In social media companies and other websites deal with this all the time there's a big kind of controversial conversation around, can you provision free services to people under sanction? And the sanctions on Russia are not the strictest sanctions the United States has, right? The strictest sanctions we have are like Cuba and Iran and some other North Korea, countries like that. The Russian sanctions are pretty, you could still fly to Russia, right? It's legal to fly to Russia, it's legal to go there. It's not a good idea, but it is legal in a way that is not legal to say go to North Korea and spend money.
Right.
So, they're pretty porous, and he does not cite a specific legal requirement. Is there risk? I mean, the Linux kernel is the most reviewed piece of open source software in the world, right? And so compared to like the SSH patch that really was scary, right?
No kidding.
And that very possibly could have been Russia. Like I think that was probably SVR.
Interesting. For some reason, I thought it was North Korea.
That's think what everybody wants you to think. That's why I think
that's
it's
the
Russia.
problem. It's very hard to do attribution, isn't it? Because there's always misdirection involved. This was the case where there was code introduced by the maintainer. This is the one where the maintainer kind of retired. And a guy who had really spent some time establishing his reputation contributed malicious code.
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And we haven't really had any good updates. And it was a library that went into a library that went into SSH. Right. So it's very smart. Somebody spent a couple of years working on it. Yep. And they worked very hard on making people think it was in Asia. It had
how
an Asian
interesting.
name. The work and the emails were all in an Asian time zone. It was just very obvious, which makes you think it wasn't. It was just too much.
If it were Asia, they would have made sure it was Russian time, so it's in a Russian name.
And the Russians do that a lot, right?
Sure.
Like you see that a lot, where it's like
all good hackers do that.
Like,
right?
Hello from Beijing, right?
Cover your tracks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then there's circles within circles, because if they really were Asian, and then they thought, well, you wouldn't think it was Asian if we said it was Asian, so we're going to say it's Asian because...
Oh my gosh. Anyway, so like
there's several levels above that.
What's the quote from Donald Trump about attribution? It could be the Russians, could be the Chinese, could be a 400-pound hacker.
400
pound in his basement. Yeah.
Right. Who knows?
Who knows? No one knows. Could be Barron.
Are there no overweight hackers in Russia or China or North Korea?
So, I mean, in this case, Torvalds, like, Finns have no lost love for the Russians. And I get that. I feel like, some of the biggest victims in the world of Vladimir Putin are the Russian people, right? And so I once again feel a lot of sympathy for normal Russians. Like, they live under a dictatorship.
Yeah, I mean, they're suffering just as much, right?
Yeah, and
inflation is 20% now in Russia because of all the military spending.
Right, and if you're a young Russian man, you are being sent into a meat grinder.
Even if you're an old Russian man.
If you're an old Russian man, if you're a convict or not convicted.
Yeah, anybody. Yeah.
They'll take anybody, right? And it'll be interesting to see if they start taking women, right? Like, it's, it's not exactly the most woke society, but like it's hard to start justifying 2024 only drafting men, it seems to me. But anyway, well,
that's one area of
it's a weird
feminism and women's liberation. I don't know if I support
I think
Russian
in the United
women
States,
being
like,
sent to the front.
It would be hard in the U.S. to have. Like,
here we do it.
We would definitely do it. And it's just like, it's just interesting that they're so desperate that they'll take like, oh, you got one leg, we'll take you, but we won't take women, right? Like, it's just kind of interesting. When you also, like, the Russians have like an incredible history of, women throwing Molotov cocktails at Nazis and tanks, right? Like, but anyway, I just find this weird because it does not seem legally required to me, and the actual technical risk is quite low. It just mostly seems like Torvalds kind of doing his thing, which I understand, but a little bit bizarre.
The people dropped, according to the register, from the maintainer list oversee Linux drivers that provide interoperability with hardware from vendors like Acer and Cirrus Logic. So they're hardware drivers. And do you think maybe those companies said, hey, I don't know. Thing is, if a company doesn't want the open source maintainer to write the drivers, they could just write the drivers themselves. Thank you very much.
Right. And there's about Taiwanese companies, right? So it's like,
right. Provide the drivers for Linux. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, there's not exactly like Russian hardware companies.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a little, I mean, it's fine. It doesn't hurt me. I just don't understand the justification without there being a real proceeding. It's quite possible there's something that happened that we're not aware of, which is unfortunate, because if something happened, he should be honest about it. He should say, we got this patch and it's sketchy, right? And that should be something that we all know about.
So I'm sure you were paying attention. I know Owen and I were last July when CrowdStrike pushed out an update that forced Windows machines
I haven't heard about this.
to reboot over and over and over again. We should mention SentinelOne does something similar to CrowdStrike, right? You monitor malware activity.
I mean, we're in a similar business. We didn't do that similarly.
Okay.
If that's what you mean. Yeah.
No, I understand. But do you have?
Yes.
So the CrowdStrike.
We make basically the same. We're in the same business. Yes. We're their biggest independent competitor. So the biggest company in the space is Microsoft, because their product's free.
They also have monitoring software out there.
Right. Windows Defender is like the biggest product in the space because they give it away for free. Like, you buy mail, you get Defender, but it's not great. It's like it's the free thing. It's what I.
But every Windows user has it. So wait a minute, I never thought of that. That's why Microsoft offers Defender, puts Defender on all versions of Windows. It's not a one-way street. They're not just protecting you. You're also sending back telemetry.
You're sending back telemetry. Yeah.
Malware.
Right. Well, and they have an enterprise version, so it's not exactly the same. So there's an enterprise version that if you buy an E5 license, or if you get E3 with like a package, that is EDR. So they have a basic antivirus version, and then CrowdStrike and SentinelOne make products that we call EDR.
EDR, right.
Endpoint detection response. So it looks for malware, but also what it does is it basically records everything that happens on your computer.
It's a sensor system.
And it sends it up to the cloud.
Yeah.
And so you don't do this for a normal computer. This is like for an enterprise. And so the enterprise security team can see, something ran on Leo's computer. It called in these DLLs. It talked to these IP addresses. I can reverse engineer all of it without even touching. You can do all the forensics and such without even touching the machine, right? It's because all the data is already up in the cloud. And that's when you're playing against this level of adversary. If you're playing against the North Koreans or the Iranians or really high-end ransomware actors and such, that's what you have to do, because you can't just be looking for known malware that exists in signature files. You have to be recording everything that goes on and be looking for new stuff.
But I think
that's how you find out about 0 days, right? You need to.
Exactly. Yeah.
But to me, Alex, one of the fascinating things is that to defend in real time against these kind of threats creates a new kind of fragility in the system. And I think that's what the CrowdStrike incident revealed.
Yeah, because they were running in ring 0. They were running at the lowest possible level.
And, you don't always have the opportunity to kind of like stress test these updates that are sent out.
Well, you do. I mean, this is the difference between CrowdStrike and everybody else in the marketplace.
You should test them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So this is where kind of like the issues arise.
There is an urgency to pushing out these updates.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's incumbent on you to make sure, if they had put it on one or two machines at work and noticed they were rebooting over and over again, they might have said, oh, wait a minute, we got a little problem. They actually was a chain of failures. And it is an old story, I know, but the reason we're bringing it up is because Delta Airlines has hired David Boies, yes, that David Boies, to seek damages from CrowdStrike and Microsoft. You may remember Delta was the airline that was down for, I think, 10 days, suffered $500 million in losses, canceled thousands of flights, stranding many, many people, including Christina Warren and others. And they say if CrowdStrike had just done their appropriate due diligence, this wouldn't have happened.
So
This is Delta's complaint. CrowdStrike caused a global catastrophe because it cut corners, took shortcuts, and circumvented the very testing and certification processes it advertised for its own benefit and profit. If CrowdStrike had tested the faulty update, by the way, capitalized faulty update on even one computer before deployment, the computer would have crashed. Now, again, we're going to say that you are, Alex, kind of a competitor, work for a competitor. So take this, in consideration.
And in response, CrowdStrike said that it was Delta's fault for having antiquated infrastructure, which, I don't know how you vet that, but it would not shock me that an airline has antiquated infrastructure. If you look at Southwest, they have struggled with this problem of technical debt for some time.
That's right. Yeah. Many people who were bit by this CrowdStrike thing got up and running much more quickly. In some cases, instantly. We had one listener email us saying we had CrowdStrike running on our perimeter machines, so they crashed immediately, which kept all of the internal machines safe. And we were able to fix that fairly quickly. We felt, we had a lot of our listeners who spent long hours that weekend fixing the thing. So, yeah, I mean, I have to say it seems less credible that Delta's problem was CrowdStrike's and Microsoft's problem and was more Delta's problem.
To be clear, they didn't end up suing Microsoft. So that was the original complaint about Microsoft, but the lawsuit was only against CrowdStrike, which I think is the right thing. Because in the end, Microsoft didn't do anything wrong. So it looks like So
Microsoft has an API that CrowdStrike could use, Sentinel-1 could use to operate not at ring 0 with these sensors.
So every EDR, every high-end anti-malware product has a kernel module. You have to, You have to. Yeah.
Microsoft's APIs are insufficient to do the job.
That's right. They are. What they have done is after this incident, they held a summit up at Redmond, and I actually went up there. CrowdStrike was there, Trend Micro, Sophos, kind of everybody from the anti-malware industry was there. And they're talking about a future in which you don't have to run in the kernel. I don't think it's going to happen for quite a while. And it's because there's at least 3 reasons why you have to be in the kernel. The first is to see all the things you need to see. There's a bunch of telemetry you need to gather that is just not made available to user mode. Now, that could be made available to user mode, but Microsoft would have to just do a really good job of being comprehensive in doing that, and they never have in the past. The second is to, at a very fast rate, be able to let these pieces of software intercept and decide whether or not a piece of potentially malicious code can actually do something, right? So, we don't just alert, oh, this thing's bad. We do things like stop file access, stop network access. And doing that from user mode can cause humongous performance issues, right? So you're never going to have Microsoft create a call out to user mode that then synchronously blocks a file read. That would be insane to have like a 128 core machine production Windows server that is doing synchronous user mode calls for individual file accesses. And so doing that from a kernel thread is really the only way.
You just have to. You just have to be at that low level to monitor and to do the kind of blocking that you need to do.
Yeah. And the third reason that I don't see ever being fixed is if the bad guys get into the kernel, the only way we can protect ourselves from being killed by the bad guys is from being in the kernel. And it's only been a couple of months since Microsoft had a massive kernel vulnerability, right? So it turns out they had this IPv6 kernel vulnerability that has existed in every version of Windows since Windows Vista. So it's been around for like over a decade. And if the bad guys can get in the kernel and we're only in user mode, what would happen is they could just make us disappear. It's like, traveling back in time and killing your grandparents. It'd be impossible to protect ourselves. And so that it's called anti-tamper. And so CrowdStrike, us, Trend, Microsoft themselves all have kernel modules. Now the difference here is you don't have to put all of your code in the kernel. And that's an engineering architectural decision CrowdStrike made, was they have a bunch of dangerous code in the kernel and they're pulling their signature files into the kernel and they're parsing them in the kernel. In fact, they were doing regexes in the kernel and they're not checking these regexes.
Oh,
and they
my
did
God.
an out-of-bound regex.
Oh,
read.
geez. It was a regex that crashed it?
Yes. It was a regex that was looking for too many items and they were doing like an unbounded regex.
And so it just filled the buffer and overflowed.
Right. And so what you need to do is like, if you have a kernel module, you just minimize it and it does the minimal stuff. And then you do all the dangerous stuff in user mode. And that's what we've done the entire time. And so I think where we'll end up is Microsoft, they have this dream of pushing everybody out of the kernel. Realistically, I think what they can do is they can push CrowdStrike to one, test stuff. So, two, not deploy everything all at once, which
do the minimal amount in the kernel.
And do the minimal amount
that you have to do.
Yes. Which is then this is the big argument now that Delta's going to make, right? Is that everybody else in the industry pretty much was doing these things. And so the fact that CrowdStrike was not doing stage rollouts, was not doing telemetry on rollouts, was not doing testing, because like you said, this instantly killed a Windows machine as soon as a name pipe was created. Yeah. Name pipes are created dozens of times a second, even on an idle Windows machine. Right. So like it's
you would
the
have
kind
known.
Of thing you should know immediately if you do any testing.
What they said was that their test harness was broken, and the guy who pushed it out didn't know that, so he did test it, but the test hadn't been updated, so the test had a stub that just said, yeah, passed.
Yeah. Right, and he didn't run it even on a Windows virtual machine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fine to have tests, but you should probably run it once on a machine.
And then you do stage rollouts, right? You never roll something out
then that's
to millions
the other
of machines at one time.
Like, and we've seen that. Apple does that. Microsoft does that. They don't push out these things all at once.
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
And you have telemetry.
So you think there is some culpability on CrowdStrike's part?
Oh, absolutely. I think they absolutely screwed this up. These are like basic engineering things, right? Like doing stage rollouts is how people have done this for 20 years. Having telemetry in rollouts is how people have done this for 20 years.
Right.
I guess the tricky question is Delta going to be able to kind of prosecute that level of technical argument and
do you push for a jury trial, Owen? I guess you do, right? Or no?
12 random people in Fulton County. You have to explain to them like stage rollouts.
You don't. That's the point. You just say they screwed us because they didn't do the right thing, and look what happened. And the jury goes, "Yeah, that was terrible."
Of course, this is also probably why you do it in Fulton County. Is I'm guessing Delta Airlines is like a beloved brand.
Exactly.
In Georgia. Yeah. I mean, David Boies knows what he's doing, right? Like
he's a good lawyer.
It seems like this will settle. I mean, it
didn't though, right? Like that's why they filed it. It hasn't settled yet.
Right. Yeah. That it has not settled so far suggests that either CrowdStrike is digging in their heels or Delta's asking for too much.
We should just mention, for people who don't know the name David Boies, you should. He was the guy who led the government's prosecution of Microsoft back in the late 90s. And he also represented Al Gore in the election of 2000. He's been very active. Represented Theranos, not to his best.
He teamed
credit.
up with Olson on making gay marriage legal, right?
Yeah, that's right. He overturned Prop 8. Good for him. He also represented Harvey Weinstein, as any attorney does. You play both sides. But he's a very.
We got paid up front on that one.
He did also represent two of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. So I think, an attorney's job is to be an advocate and on both sides of it. And he's a very, very good attorney. So they hired the best. I'm sure the most expensive anyway. We should.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question. Is like, are they paying him hourly or is he just splitting it 50-50?
Just split the settlement. $500 million Delta said they lost due to CrowdStrike. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. And I think what they have to do is the big test here is they have to show that CrowdStrike was negligent, right? Because like the way these contracts work is
right.
Under normal circumstances, you're limited to the amount of money the software cost.
Well, actually, that's another interesting topic, which we'll cover at some point, which is software liability. The EU has now ruled, we talked about this Tuesday on Security Now, the EU is now saying companies will be liable for Remember, every time you open a shrink wrap package, it says, we make no assertion that this software is fit for purpose, will do what it says it does. We make no promises it won't break your machine. It's not on us, man. And the EU has decided, no, it is on you. And I think that there has been some move in the United States to do the same thing. I think President Biden's national security initiative, it also involves software liability.
Yeah, the National Cyber Director, that's part of like the National Cyber Strategy, is to create some level of liability. Like the details of that are where the devil.
Well, it's very tricky, right? And you can bet that there are quite a few software companies, including some of the richest companies in the world, maybe the richest company in the world, that don't want to be completely held liable for the failure of their software.
On how you handle open source, right? Is like
that's a big one, right? Who's liable for open source? You could just carve it out and say, if it's open source, it's not, they're not liable, right?
Which then creates all these interesting questions about like, that will create a huge amount of incentives for people to quote unquote open source
their stuff.
And then create these weird licensing things where it's technically open source and you're selling the logo or something. I'm sure like people would find like crazy ways to use that.
There's no law ever made that can't be gamed in some way.
It would be interesting to see if a future administration or a future Congress really takes action against click wrap licenses. Courts have generally found that those are valid, even though no one is actually reading the terms.
It's amazing, isn't it? Anyway, I want to take a little break. We will come back. We have more to talk about. We haven't talked about AI in the whole show. Can you believe it? Don't worry.
Oh, you ruined it. We almost made it.
We're gonna.
We almost made it.
Almost made it. It's hard to do a show these days without talking about AI. And I have to say, I go back and forth. At first, I thought, there's nothing to it. Then I became a accelerationist for a while. I took a walk on a beach with a guy. He convinced me. And now I don't know. But anyway, we'll talk about an AI issue. And a reason that you might want to tell your doctor not to use AI in just a moment. Owen Thomas is here. San Francisco Business Times. Things going well? You're still printing a newspaper? Oh, wait a minute, he froze.
Oh, yeah.
There he is.
Yes, we still put out a weekly paper.
On paper, on actual newsprint.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, I think it's a useful exercise to kind of think about like what's the one big story we can give readers a week. It forces news judgment. It hones news judgment, and it's a good kind of marketing piece, conversation piece.
As opposed to just every day we file another story, every day 10 more stories. You have to think, what's this week's headline going to be? in the San Francisco Business Times. You know, I love San Francisco. God bless it. It's I lived there for quite a few years. It's one of my favorite cities, and it's gone through some bad times, and I'm just rooting for it.
Yeah, I think we're kind of shifting from doom loop to boom loop.
Good. I hope that's true.
At the very least, we're getting out of the gloom loop, and people are kind of trying to think of ways to get downtown more active. Actually, while I was walking down here from North Beach, there was a concert going on in
nice.
In the downtown area on a Sunday, which I think would have been unheard of pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Well, good. I just love it, and it's a wonderful city, our little fishing village by the bay, and I'm glad that
that's
there's. Yeah,
hey, you can still buy Dungeness crab at Pier 45.
Yeah, but usually you have to wait until after the Dungeness crab season because they keep blocking it and putting it off. And last year we couldn't get Dungeness crab until after New Year's. What's the point?
I mean, crab for Christmas. It's a tradition.
That crab for Christmas. It's a tradition. It's the best crab too, by the way. I'm sorry, Baltimore. All right, we'll have more in just a bit with the great Owen Thomas and, of course, Alex Stamos from CrowdStrike, from Sentinel-1.
You almost said CrabStrike.
CrabStrike. Hey, there's an idea for a product.
When your Dungeness crab season is disrupted, CrabStrike is the company you turn to.
CrabStrike. Our show today brought to you. There's another show title.
The AI-generated logo makes itself, really.
Oh yeah. Get to Midjourney, kids. Let's see a logo. Our show today brought you. You know what, Benito? Can you send Alex the access to the Discord? Because I'm sure there'll be some animated logos popping up in our Discord any minute now with CrabStrike. And there it is. Yep. Well, these crabs' claws ain't just for attracting mates. Okay. Now it's a bunch of crabs, animated crab gifs in our Discord. Our show today brought to you by Lookout. I love Lookout. I love the name. And I love what they do. Data protection from endpoint to the cloud to your happy place. Today, every company is in the business of managing data. We talk about that a lot. It means, of course, every company is at increased risk of data exposure and data loss between cyber threats and breaches and leaks. And, of course, cyber criminals aren't getting dumber. They're getting more sophisticated every day. Modern breaches happen now in minutes, not months. At a time when the majority of sensitive corporate data is out there on the cloud, traditional boundaries no longer exist, and the strategies for securing that data have fundamentally changed, which is why you need Lookout. From the first phishing text to the final data grab, Lookout stops modern breaches as swiftly as they unfold, whether it's on a device, in the cloud, across networks, or as it often is, working remotely at the local coffee shop. Lookout gives you clear visibility into all your data at rest and in motion. You'll monitor, you'll assess, and you'll protect without sacrificing productivity for security. You can still go to the coffee shop. With a single unified cloud platform, Lookout has another advantage. It simplifies and strengthens. One platform means one source of truth. Not a lot of complexity, not a lot of cracks for things to fall through. It reimagines security for the world that will be today. Visit lookout.com right now. Learn how to safeguard data, how to secure hybrid work, how to reduce IT complexity. Lookout.com. We thank them so much for supporting our show, and we thank you for supporting the show by going to lookout.com. We also thank our Club Twit members who make this show possible with their $7 a month, ad-free versions of all of our shows, and lots of other benefits. We had a great Stacy's Book Club on Friday. Next one is coming up in December. We've got some books. You can vote if you're in the club. Pick the book that you want us to read, and we'll all get together in a couple of weeks and talk about it. This Friday, it's our photo guy, Chris Marquardt. Again, we stream these live so everybody can see them, but if you want to watch them after the fact, you have to use the Twit Plus feed, and that's for Club Twit members. We don't want to have a complete impermeable paywall, but we do want to encourage people to join the club. It helps us balance the books. Frankly, it doesn't go into my pocket. It helps pay for Benito and all the people who do such a great job keeping this network going. And so we've tightened the belt quite a bit. Moved out of the studio, as you can see, into my attic. But we also need your help. Check it out. twit.tv/clubtwit. And whether you're a Club Twit member or not, I want to invite you to help us out with our best ofs. Benito says, help me. But we do this at the end of every year. We take the best clips of the year and we run it as our holiday special. We're going to do it for this show and a number of other shows. If you've been watching all year and you've got a moment you really remember that you think would be great in the best of, I invite you to contribute it. It's easy to do. We have a page on the website, twit.tv/best of. Give us as much information as you can. If you don't know the exact date and time, that's fine. But whatever you know, do fill that in, and that'll help Benito and John Ashley and Kevin King and our great producers put together a best of for you for this holiday season. Burke put some delicious crab up on the Discord. We're talking a lot of crab in the club. Yum, yum, yum. All right, on we go with the show. Our great panel, Alex Stamos, Owen Thomas. Let's talk about AI. Researchers say that OpenAI's Whisper.ai, its transcription tool, is being used in hospitals. I know my doctor, I was at the doctor the other day, has a sign. He says, I'm using a transcription tool so I don't have to type while you're talking, so I can pay more attention to you. The problem is these tools, in fact, Whisper specifically says, don't use this in high-risk domains, but it is unfortunately prone to making up chunks of text or even entire sentences. This is a story coming from the Associated Press. They interviewed more than a dozen software engineers, developers, and academic researchers. Experts said some of the invented text known in the industry as hallucinations can include, and this is really shocking, racial commentary, violent rhetoric, and even made-up medical treatments. Unfortunately, Whisper is being used at many industries, including in hospitals and in doctors' offices, to do transcriptions. Oops. A University of Michigan researcher conducting a study of public meetings, for example, said he found hallucinations in 8 of every 10 audio transcripts he inspected. A machine learning engineer said he initially discovered hallucinations in about half of the 100 hours of Whisper transcriptions. Do we use Whisper, Benito, for our transcriptions?
No, we use
we use humans.
Podium.
No,
we use AI. It's Podium.
AI. Okay. I've used Whisper, locally on my Mac, and I thought it did a very good job, but I wasn't looking. I think if you use Whisper in a podcast, much less likely to harm somebody than if you use it in a medical setting.
Yeah, I've used Whisper. There's Whisper.cpp is actually like a super optimized version that runs really well locally on the Mac. I don't know is that the version you use?
I can't remember.
Because the OpenAI versions like Python, it's actually quite slow.
And it's hard to install and so forth. It's on the App Store. There are a number of Whispers on the Mac App Store, and they're all based on the same model.
Okay, there's a good one called Whisper.cpp, which is on GitHub and pretty easy to compile.
I can't remember which of these. I think it's
I can't recommend anything that's precompiled, but if you want the open source,
this is precompiled.
Install if you want to, just do it from the command line. But anyway, works fine for that. This is I think actually brings up a good example of where we need AI regulation. I'm glad that Newsom vetoed the kind of crazy
that's a good question. Yeah, so the governor of California vetoed the AI regulation.
Yeah.
There was a mixed, there were Nancy Pelosi, for instance, lobbied hard for him to veto it. Elon Musk said, please pass it. So there's kind of a mixed bag of people against and for.
Yeah.
Newsom said it's too early for regulation and this is not the right regulation, but he would work next year with the California legislature to come up with something more appropriate.
Yeah. I actually wrote an op-ed in my old hometown newspaper, SAC-B, against it.
Good. I bet you, since you're in Sacramento, the state's capital, a lot of people, a lot of legislators might have read it. What were your objections?
So a couple things. One, that it was really driven by the doomers. I mean, from my perspective, like the AI regulatory conversation, too much of it is driven by the sci-fi doomer folks, which is probably why, Elon
is one of them. That's right.
Some of those people, I think, legitimately are doomers, right? Like they really do believe that AI is going to take over the world. I think
Geoffrey Hinton, for instance, Nobel laureate, Geoffrey Hinton, who was the father of neural networks. That's what he won the Nobel Prize for. He says, we're headed for doom, doom and gloom.
Right.
So
and you have to respect.
Knows where he speaks, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think it doesn't do anything in that area, right? Because it only applies to California.
Right.
It only applies
Although,
to
as some have pointed out, as the fifth largest economy in the world, so as California goes, often so goes the nation.
Right, but like realistically, this was a law that was just going to push a bunch of companies out of California. Right, like this was this is the full employment for Austin Software Engineers Act, right? From my perspective,
I think that's what Newsom was saying as well. And one of the things people didn't like was the so-called kill switch. If you have a big enough company, you had to have a. That's very much sci-fi, right? You had to have a place to unplug the AI, so it couldn't. And the
other problem is like. We're only really going to be able to do this once at the state level, right? It's something we should do at the federal. Yeah. And it did not address what's going on right now. So what is going on with AI right now are things like this, right? That you have well-meaning things that have been toys that have been for AI, right? OpenAI put out this experiment, Whisper, that's open source, that's meant just for people to play with and to give feedback on. And for fun, I use it for some academic research. I've used it for fun things. And it explicitly says, do not use this for anything important.
Right.
And this bill would do absolutely nothing to discourage doctors from using it, from people from using it in life-saving, in life-critical situations. It would do nothing to punish people who decide to use it in situations where it could actually have real impact. It does nothing for the fact that people are using AI to really cause really serious individualized harm, for the creation of deepfake nudes, the creation of artificial child sexual abuse material, the creation of disinformation and deepfake images to manipulate our election. It does nothing for any of that. And so, like, if we're going to pass a bill, you should address what's going on today and not just apply to one. It was only going to apply to models that aren't going to exist for a couple of years anyway from the baseline that it had, and for risks that aren't going to exist for years and years. It was just kind of silly. And it had a bunch of stuff in there around modeling risks that really can't be modeled by companies that are making fundamental baseline models of like thinking about, how could this thing take over the world? And so all you're going to do is generate these like huge PDFs of how could this large language model possibly used to take over the world, and then never actually address the bad things that were happening. And all that you're going to do is like, people are going to be like, wait, didn't we pass AI regulation? And then they're reading story after story after story of this kind of stuff that's actually hurting people day to day. It was really stupid from my perspective.
Good.
Yeah.
I think the risk with any legislation is really the bigger risk for me is legislative capture, which is essentially that a dominant company like OpenAI shapes the legislation to kind of suit its business model and discourage new entrants. One example I think is PayPal. PayPal early on said, "Oh no, we don't need to be regulated," and then as they got closer to their IPO, they said, "Oh, you know what? We're going to register as a money transmitter in all 50 states, and get legal." And then that created a massive regulatory moat that new companies like say Square had to jump over to kind of.
Sure, you might even say that's why Elon Musk wanted California to pass that bill, because he has his own AI, Grok. And he loves the idea of stymieing competition. He also signed that letter that said, along with Geoffrey Hinton, that said we should pause AI development for 6 months, as if the Chinese would pause their AI development for 6 months. But a part of the thing that worries, I think, a lot of people with AI is giving AI agency in the physical world. Giving Whopper, the computer from war games, the ability to launch nuclear missiles. Seems like a bad idea, and yet it seems like the direction we are rapidly moving.
I mean, to take it back to an earlier topic, isn't that essentially what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's become a test bed, hasn't it, for autonomous weapons, including drones, which scares me a little bit. I think that there's a reason maybe to say, don't give AIs agency until they can stop hallucinating, at least.
Well, the reality of the battlefield there is that jamming has become kind of a part of
GPS jamming. Yeah.
Yeah. And communications jamming has become a very strong reality of the battlefield. So, the answer to that is you create drones that can, basically function while disconnected on their own. That's
Yikes.
Autonomy.
That's how you respond to that. Yeah.
Right. So that's where, seems like where we are rapidly headed. Take it back to Taiwan. Taiwan is studying what's happening in Ukraine and kind of the asymmetrical drone warfare that Ukraine is smartly deploying against the Russian invader.
Very effectively deploying. Yeah.
And they're basically looking at, is there going to be a way to sink the Chinese flotilla before it hits their shores?
Well, it's not just Taiwan that's watching what's happening in Ukraine. China is also watching with great interest, also to see how the U.S. and the West respond, right? How hard is it going to be to take over Taiwan? One thing that concerned me a little bit this week, Anthropic announced a tool that could take over the user's mouse cursor. And in response, Google said, oh, yeah. Actually, Google didn't say it, but there is a report that Google is exploring a AI that could take over your web browser, Project Jarvis, which kind of makes sense. The idea is that, you tell the AI, hey, I want an Uber, and the AI goes to the Uber website and books the Uber for you or does the shopping for you or whatever.
My first response to this as a consumer is inject this directly into my veins. Like, how
you want Project Jarvis? You can't wait.
How much time do I waste clicking on the button that says, yes, I accept your terms to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Right.
Like every day. Just, hey, Apple, you're claiming to have Apple Intelligence. Well, Apple Intelligence, that Wi-Fi button. Just click it for me. I just want to connect to the Wi-Fi. I don't care what I just agreed to because I don't have any choice. I want to connect to the Wi-Fi.
This is Aaron Wu's story in The Information. And the headline is a little bit maybe sensationalistic. Google preps AI that takes over computers. But that does scare me. That's agency in the real world. I mean, if you can't trust it,
but
you're giving it your browser.
This is super common in the enterprise. Like it's a whole field of automation where, essentially computers are being trained to do kind of some of the grunt work, copy, paste, click, and actually automate that at the desktop level.
Well, good news. You'll be able to inject this into your veins, Mr. Thomas, by the end of the year. Project Jarvis. Google's funny because they announce this stuff all the time. Google I/O is full of announcements for stuff that never really ships, but they are starting to inch closer and closer to, right now you can have Google try to book a hair appointment for you or a barber appointment for you, a restaurant reservation. I was at my barber's the other day and she said, yeah, I keep getting calls from Google. I just hang up on it. So I don't know with what success. I keep waiting for the simultaneous translation that both OpenAI and Google have promised. I guess we're getting inching closer to that. Although if it's using Whisper AI, maybe that's something to be a little bit nervous about. Do you worry, Alex, about AI getting agency, getting actual agency in the physical world?
Not so much. I mean, the thing that a number of people talk about being the big gap is that AI doesn't want anything, right? So that is still something for which there's there's not a fundamental, when we talk about AI taking over the world, the real problem is AI doing bad things because human beings have asked it to. So I do worry about these situations in which people
It's humans
decide,
that are the problem.
Right, humans putting AI in situations where AI is making decisions that are life critical, and we should not do so. And, that is what the risk is.
Right.
And we are doing that intentionally because it's cheaper or faster or more convenient for us.
Actually, I've seen some say that one of the uses for AI is by companies like X.com, formerly Twitter, is because X created its platform based on users' contributions. But as users leave the platform, we have to turn to something else. We've mined all the user contributions. Now it's time for AI to fill in the gap based on the user contributions that the AI has scraped, right? Let's take a little break. We come back with more. We're talking to the smartest people I know. Of course, Alex Stamos from SentinelOne. He's the CISO there. And Owen Thomas from the fantastic San Francisco Business Times. Our show today brought to you by, and maybe after listening to all this, you might want to use ExpressVPN. A few decades ago, before the internet, private citizens used to be, private. The internet's changed all that, hasn't it? Think about everything you've browsed, you've searched for, you've watched, you've tweeted. Now imagine all that data being crawled, collected, and aggregated by data brokers, put into a permanent public record, your record. They know everything about you. We know this after the National Public Data Breach, where hundreds of millions of people's social security numbers were leaked. Their names, their addresses. Having your private data exposed for others to see was once something only celebrities had to worry about. Now, in an era where everyone's online, everyone's a public figure. That's why when I go online, especially when I'm out of the house, I keep my data private with ExpressVPN. This is a really great company doing a VPN that really works because they go the extra mile. Now, it's not a free VPN. And I would caution you against any free VPN because if they're not charging you, they're paying for the VPN somehow. Very likely by selling your data onto data miners, right? They got to pay for these servers somehow. ExpressVPN is very reasonable, less than $7 a month when you use our offer, but that $7 goes to supporting servers all over the world, rotating their IP addresses so it's not even obvious you're coming from a VPN. It's one of the ways they can get around geographic restrictions very effectively. They also have enough bandwidth so you can watch HD video. You can watch that Netflix show out of the UK at home and still see it in HD video. They also really respect your privacy. For instance, when you press that button on your ExpressVPN app, it launches the server in the default is the closest, fastest server, but it could be anywhere in the world. Launches that server in RAM. It's sandboxed, so it cannot write to the hard drive. And then as soon as you leave, as soon as you close the VPN connection, it's gone out of RAM, and there's no trace of your visit at all. So that's one way ExpressVPN takes an extra step to protect your privacy. They also run on a custom Ubuntu distribution that every time the server is rebooted, wipes the hard drive, starts completely from scratch. So even if it could somehow write to the drive every morning, it's gone. That's what I call caring about privacy, going the extra steps. Everyone needs to use ExpressVPN because you're not using your device's unique IP address, you're using their IP address. It's hiding your IP address, which makes it much more difficult for data brokers to put together the information they get about you. It's the best VPN out there because it encrypts 100% of your network traffic, of course, with strong encryption to keep your data safe from anybody on that public Wi-Fi network. That's really important, too, because even if you're on an encrypted site, we now know, thanks to Firesheep, that unencrypted non-HTTPS connections would be visible to that guy with the hoodie sitting next to you in the coffee shop. But even if he can't see the content, he can see where you're going. He can see you've logged in. He can see your computer. And in some cases, using simple hardware, he can identify the access points you regularly access, including your home access point, impersonate it. Your computer goes, hey, we're home, joins his computer. You can't tell because he's connecting you to the internet, but he's also watching everything that's happening. I mean, there's all sorts of things that ExpressVPN prevents. It works on all your devices, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, and you can even put ExpressVPN on your home router. They even offer routers, very good routers for sale with ExpressVPN built in, and you're protected. Everybody in the house is protected that way. Protect your online privacy by visiting expressvpn.com/twit, expressvpn.com/twit. And here's the deal. You get an extra 3 months free when you buy a 1-year package, bringing the price down below $7 a month. expressvpn.com/twit. We thank him so much for supporting This Week in Tech. And we continue on with our fabulous panel. We've got Alex Stamos here, Owen Thomas. Hello, panel. Hello.
I was just demoing that kind of interception for my students. Wi-Fi pineapple.
Oh, the Wi-Fi pineapple. Oh, you went up. I saw you got up. You got your pineapple.
Yeah.
So that thing is like $100 bucks, right?
Yeah.
It's not expensive. Our dear friend Darren Kitchen sells it on his site. What does the pineapple do?
It does a bunch of things, but one of the cool things it does is it will listen for beacons from clients who are looking for their memorized list of.
So that's how it figures out what
Yes.
what access points you've joined in the past.
Right. So what I was doing
your device. I never knew this. Your device is sending out the names, the SSIDs of Wi-Fi.
everything of the Wi-Fi remembers. Yes.
Oh my God! All the time.
All the time, yeah. So I was doing that in class, is like while I was teaching Wi-Fi interception, I was running it, and then I popped it up of like, oh, by the way, any of these look familiar? And it's the name of like all of the frats they live in and all that.
Oh my
So,
God!
Yeah.
And of course, the way to use that is to find the one that looks like home.
Well, right, because what you can do is you can put. I wasn't doing this because that would be a violation of the Wiretap Act. But you could set it to a mode where it'll automatically then for anything that gets out there, it'll automatically advertise that SSID. So,
And it's closer. It's stronger than the the Wi-Fi access point.
Yeah, you can set it to be illegally loud. Yes.
Oh, really? You
Right,
can shout.
You can tell it to transmit at a level that the FCC is not happy with.
Yeah, but they're not in the coffee shop at the moment.
No. Or right, and so you have it in your backpack as you walk around campus or whatever.
Wow.
And yes.
So now you're impersonating the frat's Wi-Fi access point. That laptop joins it, saying, "Hey, I'm home."
Right. You give it a DHCP address, and
It doesn't.
now you
It
relay all
doesn't
this traffic.
decrypt TLS traffic, though, right? That's still encrypted.
No, it should not be able to do that automatically.
Okay.
So you'd have to do something tricky there.
But you can see metadata, and
You
that's
can decrypt
often
WPA.
valuable.
So one of the things you can do is so if somebody's beaconing out for an encrypted network, then you can man the middle of WPA handshake.
Oh, you're kidding.
You can take, yes. So you can take, that's one of the things we do in the class is I actually have them crack a WPA handshake. So WPA 1 and 2 are
it's
crackable.
that's why we use
you don't
WPA
crack
3
it on
now.
here. Yeah. You don't crack it on here. You take it home and you do it on like a fast CPU or preferably a GPU.
Because you need to collect enough packets.
No, just the handshake.
Just the handshake.
Yeah, just the initial handshake. There's a nonce but it uses an old algorithm to do that.
I am so
WPA 3
jealous of
uses
your students.
A zero knowledge. Yeah.
So, what is the name of that course?
It's called the Hack Lab. It's Intro to Cybersecurity, International Policy
awesome.
268. Yeah.
That's the one where you're going teaching lawyers how to do that stuff?
Yeah. That's my intro to cyber for non-CS majors. And then I teach CS in the spring.
I think everybody should so what you just told us, I don't think people generally know that. And that pineapple is widely available. It's not an illegal device, right?
You can, this is what I told my students. Buying the device is legal. Owning the device is legal. Almost everything you can do with the device is illegal.
It's violation of the wiretap law.
Right. Yeah, right. I mean, but like actually buying it and owning it is fine. But almost all the buttons you push in it are technically not legal.
So when Hack 5 sells it, they're saying it's for pen testing, right?
That's right. Yeah. It'd just be very hard to use it in a way that's legal, because if you ever, even in a pen test situation, if you're using a situation where you ever use it against somebody who did not consent, it would technically be illegal.
Well, our good friend Russell Schwartz, who of course hosted Floss Weekly for years, is a brilliant Perl programmer, very well known, was working at Intel, and he noticed a vulnerability which he exploited and then revealed to Intel, and they prosecuted him, and he went to jail.
Yeah.
He thought he was doing him a favor.
You gotta be careful.
You gotta be careful. Don't do anybody any favors. They may not take well. Other news: video game preservationists have lost a legal fight with the U.S. Copyright Office. I think this is really a shame. The Copyright Office was asked, can libraries lend games, particularly out of print games, old games, for study, just as they would lend books? Kendra Albert, representing the Software Preservation Network and the Library Copyright Alliance, said preservationists weren't asking for a lot. It was the thing that basically exists for all kinds of special collections in the library. The library reviews the request. I'd like to look at this Gutenberg Bible, make sure it's not harmful, then allows access to work. You cannot check out the Gutenberg Bible, okay? I know, I tried. But there are plenty of old, out-of-date first editions, that's the kind of thing that you can check out for research purposes. All forms of media, but apparently not video game cartridges, because the Entertainment Software Association argued that people would take advantage of this to liberate the games, to damage the market for classic video games, and that the preservationists didn't, quote, have appropriately tailored restrictions to ensure that uses would be limited to teaching restriction or scholarship uses. And the Librarian of Congress agreed, which is sad, I think, because these video games are an artwork that without preservationists will die. And most of these video games, the publishers have no intent to resell. They're in many cases, they're abandoned. It's funny because the Librarian of Congress just recently made it legal to repair the McFlurry machines. So,
well, at least they have the priorities straight. Thank God.
But can't check out a video game cartridge? No. They want, so this goes through the Librarian of Congress because it's part of the DMCA. It's part of the copyright law, and the Librarian of Congress gets to rule on these. The ESA said, we recognize the importance of preserving video games and protecting game hardware given their significance in culture and society. Oh, that sounds good. That's good. With today's decision, the U.S. Copyright Office confirms the current level of video game preservation is appropriate. We got enough preservation, okay? Okay. Congratulations, ESA. You have protected somebody. Nintendo, I guess. I don't know.
Atari? Whoever owns
Atari.
who owns the Atari IP now?
There is a company. There is an Atari. In fact, I bought a little. So this is the thing. There is a market for these games being resold. I bought a little mini Atari 400. It was this big, with all the games built into it. So some of these companies are re-releasing them. Owen, are you a classic game aficionado?
You know, I was reminiscing with my brother about a game we used to play, I think on an Apple II called Temple of Apshai.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently that is one that you can play online through a DOS emulator. It's that old.
Yeah.
So the really old games, you know, apparently have kind of fallen into that abandonware category where, you know, the publishers either have released them or aren't going after people. But yeah, it's sad that, you know, abandonware is sad. There are a lot of abandoned works. You know, I'd be very concerned also about what's happening with the Internet Archive, which is fighting a variety of copyright lawsuits, as well as a recent
DDoS attack. Yeah,
cyber attack.
Yeah.
You know, that's a really important institution, and you know, if we, you know, I think people think of it as the Wayback Machine, but it preserves a lot of digital culture and content.
Steve Gibson was talking about the Internet Archive the other day. This is an interesting, there's a new, you probably know about this, Alex, a new email standard called BIMI, B-I-M-I, that allows you to embed your logo in email, almost like a verification cert. It's kind of certificate backed so that people know this really came from, the Internet Archive or McDonald's or whatever. And in the process of doing this, he went to his certificate authority. There are two certificate authorities that do this, one of which is DigiCert. He went to DigiCert, and they went through the whole process. It's like getting an EV cert. It's, they call and make sure you're you and all that stuff. But the way they find out that you have legitimate access, that your logo really has been your trademark and you've been using it for some years, they go to the Internet Archive to verify that you've been using this logo. And so his application is held up because they can't do that right now.
Because the Internet Archive's down. Oh, man.
There are so many. It's read-only right now, but it's
That's
kind of
weird
limited.
because the USPTO, you can just search. That's just
Yeah,
very
you
odd
can
that
search,
they don't
but they wanted more than
yeah.
just the fact that you have the trademark. They wanted, for some reason, this. I think as part of the BIMI standard, they wanted to show that you'd been using this for more years.
I guess also the USPTO doesn't tie it to a domain, right?
Right.
So that's
that
what
might also be the case.
They probably check USPTO.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then they also need to tie it to like something.com.
Yeah, because I have the trademark for this little shiny logo behind me, I couldn't.
How do they tie it to twit.tv?
Exactly. I couldn't prove I've been using it on the website or for my email without going back to the archives. So
right, because it's tied to like an LLC, according to USPTO. Yeah,
exactly. Apple has. This is interesting. The Information, Wayne Ma reporting, Apple has sharply scaled back production of the Vision Pro, to which John Gruber replied, "No, they've sold exactly as many as they thought they would sell, which wasn't many." I don't know what the answer of this is. October 31st, Apple will have its quarterly results for this quarter, but I don't think they will mention how many Vision Pros they've sold. But there really is some question about what the future holds. Oh, and I know you love your Vision Pro, right?
I am a VR AR hard skeptic. I just
so am I.
I just don't think I just don't think headsets are it. I don't think they get better when they get lighter. I think that I think there's so much more promise in kind of ambient technologies like AirPods, for example. And Apple has a huge growing business in AirPods. I think it's undercovered, underappreciated. The ability for Siri to kind of politely interrupt you and let you know you've got a notification, that's huge. And you can, you only have to kind of distract one sense. You can keep your eyes and hands free. And, VR kind of assumes that your eyes, ears, hands are all going to be focused on a task. I just think of how people watch TV these days, which is generally with,
half an eye.
Yeah, half an eye and another screen in their lap. How do you reconcile that with the idea of a Vision Pro or a Meta Quest?
Well, and the other thing people do is they watch usually with other people. It's not like day drinking. You want to do it alone. And if you strap this computer to your face, you're now suddenly in your own world. Whoever is there with you is being ignored. And also I'm of the opinion nobody wants to strap a computer on their face. I might disagree with you, Owen, on the idea of virtual. If these giant glasses that I'm wearing today had a heads-up display and cameras and some AI built in. I have the Meta Ray-Bans, and it's kind of cool. You can look at something and say, what is that? And it'll give you kind of an AI generic description of it. Although I did do it here in the studio, and it said you're looking at several screens, and you have the kind of setup that could be used to do a live video stream, which I thought was pretty impressive. I mean, it's obviously early days, but I think that might be. Don't you think that might be kind of cool? Owen, you'd walk down the street and you go, who is that guy? And it says, that's Leo Laporte. He used to host Twit. You know him.
I think glasses, where it's see-through and
heads up.
It's something, like I have my sunglasses on most of the time when I'm outside. It's California, right? So that has potential. I'm just very skeptical of immersive technologies.
Yeah.
I think it's
because we don't. Yeah, because life happens in multiple dimensions. How about you, Alex? Are you a VR optimist or pessimist?
Yeah, so I mean, I would love to have an AR. I think the Meta glasses with actual AR overlay would be pretty cool.
They're pretty cool. Yeah, they're already halfway there, I think.
The situations which I've enjoyed VR is when it's actually tied to my PC and some VR.
You like the
gaming
screens?
Yeah, like the full screens, but I don't like being fully cut off from the outside world. I don't have a life where I can do that, where I can just cut off completely.
You have children?
Right, it's almost never a situation where I can
have a guitar? Yeah.
Right, I mean, it's never a situation where I could just completely cut off myself from the world. So, and there's none of the headsets would allow me to be in, still have peripheral vision, still feel like I can be somewhat connected if somebody walks behind me, if my wife puts her hands on my shoulder.
Right.
That, like the fact that I've been sitting here with you for a couple hours and a kid has not barged in is a freaking miracle on a Sunday.
Well, we're almost done. So let the kids can run free.
I've been head on a swivel, it's just crazy that this is like nobody.
I used to
I've handled a couple texts of like, no, you can feed yourself. There's a pizza.
That's hysterical.
It's amazing. It's shocking, but there's no way we could have done this in VR, right? Like something would have definitely happened.
When I first started working at home, the kids were little, like 2 and 5 or something. They used to come to the door. They'd know Dad's in there, and they would pound on the door. They'd say, let me in. It was like, it did not work very well. It did not.
But I'm sitting in front of if I could really have...
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Point, I have like a 57-inch... I've got the big Samsung 57-inch screen right now.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
That's the super wide one?
The super wide, yeah.
Oh.
And so it lets me do 3... I do the 3 screens.
Yeah.
Right? And,
that's cool.
It's great, but if I could get that level of resolution and still be present and have peripheral vision stuff, but that's not what you get, right? When you put
no,
it's like you're looking through binoculars,
right?
And it feels constricting to me. It feels weird. I could not work in it all day. And also I don't mind it being tethered, and that's where everybody, Oculus, Apple, everybody wants to do the full computer, and so it makes it too heavy and such. I would not mind having. If they could give me the full thing and then have it connected to my computer. But people are moving away from that. I owned the original Oculus.
As did I. Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody wants to do the lightweight goggle that still has to be connected to a full computer.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that is not improved by better resolution, better battery life, better technology. It's just a bad idea.
But the AR, that'd be pretty cool. Like if I could have sunglasses that I could walk around with. The facial recognition stuff is super creepy. And then also I always have my biggest problem at going to conventions is recognizing people's faces.
Right.
So
it's creepy and
I would love it. Unbelievably convenient.
You should license it.
Bob, oh my God, it's great to see you.
Exactly.
Maybe if people opted in because we're LinkedIn, we know each other on LinkedIn. So they've said
there you go.
I'm supposed to know who they are. And
that's a good idea.
If I had a LinkedIn app that's this person on LinkedIn.
Maybe that's what Marissa Meyer is trying to do with Sunshine.
Yeah.
She's just too early. She has a contact manager that nobody really seems to want. But maybe that's the whole idea is that it could be that opt-in thing. Oh, I like that idea. That's really cool.
Right. An existing social graph so you're not doing strangers.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't mac on some woman you meet on the subway.
Of course, other people are going to do that, but we don't have a general.
A couple of
privacy
Harvard
law
students
in the
have already
United States.
figured out how to do it with the Ray-Bans.
Yeah.
Sigh. I actually, speaking of isolating yourself, one of the things Apple's pushing with the AirPods, and they just, I think it'll come out this week, is iOS 18.1. There's going to be some limited artificial intelligence. Apple's going to have a big week. We'll cover it all on Mac Break Weekly on Tuesday, but including new Mac Minis and so forth. But they're going to push out this update. I did try the public beta of 18.1 because I'm a hearing aid wearer. I've worn Resounds and Starkey. I'm wearing Oticon hearing aids these days because I have, after many years of being a DJ and listening to rock concerts, I've, pretty much deafened myself. I have mild hearing loss, not real strong. So I tried the Apple AirPods because they have a new hearing aid mode, which they touted. And I tried them, and they do work very much like a hearing aid. They will amplify voices around you. They have a lot of intelligence. But one thing they do, and I don't know if Apple realizes, it's very similar to this whole Vision Pro issue. Expensive normal hearing aids don't seal your ear. There's a little thing goes behind your ear, and there's a little dot that goes in your ear, but it's an amplifier. You still hear ambient sounds, but it amplifies the voices because that's what people have a hard time hearing. They want to hear people's voices. So it amplifies just a specific range where your hearing loss is in the human voice range. You're not isolated is what I'm saying. And as soon as I put in the AirPods, it seals you off. All of the audio input has to come through its microphone and its speaker. You no longer hear ambient sounds except through the computer. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's very much like Apple Vision Pro, where you're suddenly relying on the computer for your perception of the outside world. I was actually a little disappointed because my real hearing aids are thousands of dollars, and the AirPods Pro are $250.
This is a really strong example of a productive deregulation.
Absolutely, OTC hearing aids. Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the idea that you need to have it like fitted by a specialist. I mean, absolutely go to a doctor.
I will lobby for the use of an audiologist, but a lot of people can't afford it, and as a result, that and the stigma of wearing hearing aids, so many people who should have hearing aids don't. And if this puts more hearing aids into the ears of people who would otherwise not have them, I think that's great. It is creating like a weird social issue, though, of like, if you see somebody with an AirPod in, are you talking to them now? Like, right.
Like
normally you assume they're ignoring you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, are you assuming they're hearing aids now? I mean, I think it's great. I think the Bluetooth hearing aids are actually pretty cool. It's Sunday. My mom has benefited greatly that my dad's hearing aids are Bluetooth, and so we have the TV set up that that football goes straight into.
And I can take phone calls, and I even get Siri saying you got a message in my hearing aids. No, that's great. And you can and newer hearing aids use their microphones, so they're just like AirPods. Yeah. But they're medical devices as opposed to.
But like you said, I mean, the fact that it's only a couple $100 versus.
That's
a huge difference for people.
Yeah. Let's take one more break and then a couple more stories, and we're going to let your kids take you back. Alex Stamos is here. He is the CISO at SentinelOne, and I just love having you on, Alex. You're so smart, and you know so much about these subjects. You've kindly agreed to come on a kind of semi-regular basis, and I'm really grateful to that for you.
Thanks for having me, Leo.
Yeah, thank you. We just think the world of you, and your students probably do too. Also here, Owen Thomas. He's managing editor of the San Francisco Business Times, and also a dear friend of the network. And we always love having you on, Owen, as well. So thank you both.
Love being here.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to chew this stuff over with smart people. That's how I learn. I just sit here and go, oh, well. And now let's talk about EDR. We're talking about EDR. There are some things that EDR does not solve. This episode of our show, Twit, is brought to you by 1Password, which has kind of a new approach to all of this. If your end, let me give you a rhetorical question. Do your end users always work on company-owned devices, right? Oh, of course. And IT-approved apps. They never use anything else, right? Wrong. Wasn't it LastPass, the guy, the DevOps guy was running Plex on his laptop, and he hadn't patched it in a long time, and that's how the bad guys got in? No, people bring their own devices. How many iPhones are in your enterprise? They use their own apps. It's so hard to control that. How do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged devices and all those unmanaged apps? Well, that's where this new thing from 1Password comes in. It's so cool. It's called Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves problems traditional IAM and MDM cannot touch. If you think of your company's security, we were talking about Syracuse has that beautiful quadrangle, like college campus with the green sward and the perfect brick paths leading from ivy-covered building to ivy-covered building. That's like your company's network. If you just look at the company-owned devices, the IT-approved apps, the managed employee identities. But then every quadrangle has it, those paths people actually use, the shortcuts worn through the grass that are the actual shortest distance from building A to building B. Those are the unmanaged devices, the shadow IT apps, the non-employee identities, the contractors and others in your network. Most security tools work fine on those happy little brick paths. Unfortunately, a lot of the security problems take place on the shortcuts, right? The way people actually use their hardware and their apps. 1Password Extended Access Management is the first security solution that brings all those unmanaged devices and apps and identities under your control. It ensures that every user credential is strong and protected. Every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. It's security for the way we work today. Now generally available to companies using Okta and Microsoft Entra. It's in beta for Google Workspace customers. It's a really clever solution. I want you to check it out. 1password.com/twit. That's the number 1, PASSWORD. 1password.com/twit. We thank them so much for supporting the show. We thank you for supporting the show by using that address so they know you saw it here. 1password.com/twit. Wrapping things up a little bit on this episode of This Week in Tech, I have to mention this. Kroger and Walmart, this is from a New York Times story, are adopting digital price tags. You know, if you've ever worked in a grocery store, you know that price gun that you put remember they used to put stickers on everything for the price, and then they stopped doing that and they just put the price on the shelf. Well, now those are going to be digital, and there's a little concern that the reason they want it digital is because they can change it like that. And there's a little concern that there will be something called surge pricing on your groceries. Kroger and Walmart say, oh no, we would never do that. But members of Congress are a little worried. Dynamic pricing. So a lot of people buying eggs this week. Let's raise the price 20 cents. Milk is not selling. We got to get that milk off the shelf. Let's lower it. Kroger says it has no plans to implement dynamic pricing or to use facial recognition software. Walmart says no plans for dynamic pricing. And even though we use facial recognition, it's not being used to affect pricing. I think it's just a matter of time. Yeah, then what's the point? Exactly. And you could see, I mean, think of the horrible ways this could be used. Oh, those people look wealthy. All the prices just went up 20% as they walked in the store.
Hi, this is Benito. There's also a thing where, like, can you pick up something on the shelf and by the time you check out, it costs more?
Oh. Well, there's no reason why that couldn't happen. Yeah, you're right.
Technically, yes, but I think that would be, you could sue for false advertising if you pick it up off the shelf being shown a certain price.
I would hope so, but you know, that happens all the time where you go in and you got the coupon or whatever and they say, oh no, that's that doesn't apply here.
Or if you go to Macy's where basically you pick something up and you have to go to a scanner to figure out.
To find out, because it doesn't have any tag on it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kmart does that sometimes. Yeah, they don't have any tag on. Do you pay attention though as you're scanning, you're doing your grocery shopping, they're scanning. You don't see if the price is the same. You don't even remember what the price was on the shelf, do you?
When I go to Safeway, they've got so many deals. I kind of keep an eye out to make sure that,
you're smart, a savvy shopper.
I'm getting my Safeway for you or whatever discount.
I would be a terrible presidential candidate because you could ask me, well, how much is a gallon of milk? And I go, I don't know. I buy it every week, but I don't know.
I think why this story is getting so much traction is just, inflation fatigue.
Right. Well, also go to these stores. Here's a picture of the Walmart in Grapevine, Texas. You look at that, you go, well, that could change by the minute. There's no
And part of why inflation has happened, this is not in no way blaming consumers, but a reality is if businesses are able to push price increases on consumers, then inflation will kind of unfold. If businesses try to push price increases and consumers resist because they're feeling frankly tapped out, they can't afford it, sales go down, businesses will respond by reducing prices. Ta-da, inflation will slow.
Yeah. Kroger says the new price tags are designed to lower prices for more customers where it matters most, which is the weaseliest way of saying we could change prices. The Times did interview a professor of business at the Owen Business School of Washington University in St. Louis who said they could do this anyway. They don't need the shelf tags. They could do this anytime they want, which is probably a good point.
I think easier. I do think there is some pushback to variability of prices too. I've recently interviewed the CEO of Lyft, David Risher. Here in
because they do surge pricing, right?
One of the things he wanted to do when he came on board was do away with surge pricing altogether, because he says, economists love it. It's a great supply and demand thought experiment, and consumers hate it. So
hate it because we don't know what we're paying.
And it turns out you still need surge pricing in like the New Year's Eve environment, even on like a Saturday night in San Francisco. You need it to draw drivers out. Like drivers essentially kind of will, kind of quiet quit and not drive if they don't feel like they're making it.
Sure.
So
I'll never forget being in Paris. We were at Notre Dame and we wanted to go back to the hotel, and it started to snow. And we walked up to a cab, and the French cabbie's reading the newspaper, smoking his gauloise. He looked at us, and he said, no. And he went back to his newspaper. I think he rolled up the window. No.
Who do you think I am?
So
I do not drive in the snow.
Do I look like a taxi driver?
What, are you enjoying your newspaper? What's going on there? I'll never forget that.
So Lyft's response has been to introduce this price lock feature where you can commute for essentially the same price. So, if you use Lyft on the regular, you pay this monthly subscription fee and you get a locked price for, basically from your home to your work, that ride. And it's their way to kind of try to ease back on surge pricing.
Well, I can understand why, if it starts raining in San Francisco and their number of Ubers and Lyfts are limited because everybody's taking one, I can understand why they'd want to raise prices, but it's so offensive to me as a passenger that it sounds to me like they're taking advantage of it, right? I understand the economics are, well, it's a scarce resource, and in order to make it more fair, we're going to raise the price. But it just feels like they're taking advantage. Same thing with grocery stores, changing their prices in response to demand. It just seems kind of skeezy. So let's hope they don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge Uber and Lyft always has is they're always walking this line where it's not clear. Sometimes it feels like it's a unified service, and they want you to feel like you're getting a service from Uber, you're getting a service from Lyft, so it's nice and clean. And sometimes they want it to be what it really is, which is they're just introducing you to independent contractors, right? And that they are a bidding service, that you are effectively bidding on that. They're trying to find some kind of price at which somebody will provide that service to you at that moment, which is clear from Airbnb, right? When you use Airbnb, you are getting the service from some individual who owns this place because they're clearly setting the price. They're clearly providing the service. They're showing you the face of that person before you buy it. You know that the reviews say before you get it, Sally's place was great, right? But you don't get that so much with Uber and Lyft. And I think that little game they play because they want you to feel the safety of the brand because you're getting some stranger's car also bites them in this situation because you feel like Uber's the one ripping you off. And yes, they do get more money because they're taking a percentage of what you're paying. But realistically, they also do need to raise the price because like Owen said, nobody's going to come out on Fleet Week. They're not going to go sit in traffic for 45 minutes to get you out of the city if you're not paying twice or three times the price.
Well,
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, no one, no
It
one
makes sense. It's just as you said. It makes sense from an economist would say, "Oh, this makes sense," but consumers go, "No."
Yeah, no one blames eBay when a Beanie Baby goes up in price, right?
Right.
But we're talking about everyday goods and services. We're talking about like a ride to work. We're talking about a gallon of milk. And people like to have predictability around their budget for that kind of thing. And so that is the fundamental tension.
Right. Well, in this case, I mean, I think there's been all this talk about stores being the reason that price is going up. And I don't think people pay attention to the fact that the overall margin for these companies is like 1% or 2%.
It's not the stores.
Right? Yeah,
it's not the
Kroger's
stores.
and Albertsons. Like they live on
It's
nothing.
Mondelez and Nestle and PepsiCo. It's not the stores.
Right.
It's
And the
companies.
chicken processors and the three companies that actually process wheat in this country and stuff. Like the three companies that none of us can name. that if
Archer
you work
Daniels Midland, and I only know that.
All right.
But wait.
Because you watch PBS.
Aren't Target and Walmart and them
PBS,
all
exactly.
posting record profits? They're all posting record
they're
profits.
making.
though.
No, exactly. Why
So
do
they
you
are
think?
the ones. So they are the ones.
Well,
Well, maybe Walmart is doing better.
that's a
than
little
1%,
different.
But
yeah. They have huge clout.
And they all have record profits right now.
Yeah, I'm
Record
talking about the
profits.
grocery. The grocery store is actually it's different, right? That for the non-durable goods for the
Right.
Yeah.
Your local market is not raking it in, I don't think. One last story, and I thought, Owen, this would be a good one for you. There's a reason you don't see a lot of innovation in the EU, a lot of startups, a lot of, they all seem to be headquartered, many of them are headquartered in the United States. And of course, the EU's government doesn't like that too much. But there's another reason for it is that it's hard to be a VC or an entrepreneur in the EU because of the corporation regime. So founders and VCs in the EU are now backing a pan-European C Corp. They call it EU Inc. because it's kind of based on the incorporation in the United States. Europe's answer to a Delaware C Corp. Already you have in each individual state, each of those 27 states, they have something like that, but they don't have anything pan-European. And but apparently this is going to be a tough haul, according to TechCrunch, a rocky road ahead, they see. Are you covering this at all in the Business Times?
This has not hit our radar, but you definitely see a strong interest in different kinds of corporations. Look at the scrutiny that OpenAI's weird nonprofit.
That is really weird. The profit slash nonprofit. Yeah.
But I can definitely see, even in the U.S., you have controversies over, are you incorporated in Delaware like most companies?
Right.
Apple happens to be incorporated in California. I still have not figured out why that is. Elon Musk has made a big deal about pulling his companies out of California and even out of Delaware registration, because he did not like a Delaware judge telling him he had to buy Twitter after agreeing to buy Twitter. He really hated that. Yeah. So, bottom line is it does matter where your company is incorporated, and those rules do matter. Elon Musk aside, I think Delaware is popular because their courts are really,
they're chancery courts,
Yeah, the chancery court, it's really geared towards business disputes,
right.
And
they're extremely efficient.
Yeah,
right?
they know
chancery
it.
court's
They're
extremely
fast.
efficient. Yeah, it's very fast and it's very predictable. Right?
I incorporated, well, it's an LLC, but I made an LLC for Twit back in the day, 20 years ago. I asked Kevin Rose, who's the only entrepreneur I knew. He said, "Yeah, do Delaware." His rationale was if you ever want a VC investment or go public, they prefer it for that very reason. Exactly, Alex, that it's efficient, it's fast, and it's business focused. But I have to say, there's no tax benefit. We end up having to pay California's.
No, people think there's a tax benefit.
There's no tax.
Elon's
benefit.
I think Elon's gonna end up regretting it, because what happens is where you're incorporated is where shareholder lawsuits happen, right? And so he's gonna have to end up with Texas juries in like.
Oh no,
Texas,
but
for shareholder lawsuits.
He's moved all of the X.com arbitration and lawsuits to the East Texas jurisdiction that's very friendly to his lawsuits.
Well, I think,
apparently. He's
Alex,
judge shopping.
I think what you're suggesting is we'll
see. Right.
Business friendly. He's going to find out because we haven't really run this particular experiment.
Yeah, if you go to Tyler, Texas, that's where the patent trolls go, because there's one particular court that's very friendly to patent trolls.
I'm just saying, like, Texas has had a history of plaintiffs' attorneys actually doing well. So it's just
interesting.
I think, like, it's an interesting history. I'm not sure this is going to work.
Yeah, I don't. But of course, Elon is not necessarily always right. I don't. But that was the rationale for all the arbitration. Let's see if I can find that story, because we talked about it earlier this week. I did not put it on a rundown.
But to the point of the European Union thinking that this is going to be some kind of magic bullet to unlock startup creation, I think they've got a lot of other issues that they need to deal with first. I think that
I agree with you. There's a risk aversion. I remember talking to Loic Lemur, and that's one of the reasons you don't get a lot of investment, is because it's not good to fail. And so they're somewhat risk adverse, and there's lots of. I agree. There's and it's not going to.
I can't imagine. I mean, I'm not a European lawyer, obviously, but I can't imagine this releases you from the local labor laws, which is one of the hardest problems there to start a company. Is you end up like owing people 13 months of severance, right?
That's exactly what TechCrunch says. Yeah.
So okay, great. Yeah, I'll just start a company that if it fails, I end up getting sued for more money, owing people more money for longer than my company existed. It's I understand why people want to have that kind of security, but it's just incompatible with like having an incredibly dynamic startup economy.
Look, if I could take every August off, I would. And if I could go, no, I would, but I can't.
But
Elon steers. This is from The Guardian. Elon steers X disputes to conservative Texas courts. This is a service term update that did this week. There were a number of service changes at X that drove people away. Taking effect on November 15th, any lawsuits against X must be exclusively filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas or state courts in Tarrant County, Texas, even though they don't do business there.
Maybe this points actually to the need for reforms here in the U.S.
Yeah, no kidding.
The extent to which you can kind of shop from state to state or court to court, for who's got the friendliest regime. I think that raises some questions.
Hey, I know you probably want to go to dinner. I think the 49ers are playing football. There are reasons to get out of Dodge. So let's wrap this up. Owen, thank you so much for being here. Owen Thomas is managing editor at the San Francisco Business Times. Always a welcome guest. Used to be we could get you to entice you up to our studio. Not anymore. Nobody wants to come to my attic anymore. Although I have a visitor from the past I'm going to introduce you to in a little bit. Thank you for being here, Owen. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Alex Stamos, always welcome as well. CISO at Sentinel One. Are you liking the new job? Do you miss academia?
Yeah, I still get to teach, which is the part I like the most. Was being a student. So I'm enjoying it, and I do enjoy the new job. Back into the CISO saddle. It's a lot of fun. It's good to be back in the fight.
Good. Well, it's great to have your knowledge and expertise on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you to both of you. We do Twit every Sunday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Next week, 2200 UTC, because we are finally going off summertime. So you'll be able to. I used to say daylight savings time, but every time I would say that, my friend John would yell at me. I just want to come over here, John. We'll just say hi. We've been trying to entice Jammer B to join us in the studio. He's retired now from the Twit family. Great to see you. He lives on, though, through his contribution of a 128K Macintosh and the telephone. The first thing and the last thing you gave me, John. That's so nice to have you, and wish you bon voyage to your new life in the Pacific Northwest. Got a beautiful house up there and everything. If you want to watch live, as I said, we're on 8 different channels now. I love that. We have almost 1,200 people watching live right now on Discord. That's our Club Twit members get to watch there. YouTube, Twitch, X.com, Kick, LinkedIn, Facebook, and yes, we added TikTok. So you can watch us on TikTok. Unfortunately, we are not vertical video on TikTok, so we have big black bars at the top and the bottom. But it's kind of nice to be here.
Do we all look younger on TikTok, Leo?
We look younger and hipper, and we can do these great dance moves. Mostly, I get all these comments on TikTok. He's still alive, which is always
people are like, who are these people?
No, they know who. They go, oh, I used to watch him on TV years ago. He's still alive? Anyway, I'm still alive, and we still do great stuff here, so we're glad you're watching. After the fact, you can see the show by downloading it from our website, twit.tv. There's also a YouTube channel dedicated to the video. Great way to share little clips if you want to share with friends. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it. Actually, we found out that's the best way to grow our network, and we really want to get it out, get the word out to everybody, is through sharing on YouTube. And if you're a Club Twit member, we give you a free month when you refer somebody. When a friend joins Club Twit, make sure they use your name so that you get a month's free Club Twit. So you could, in theory, you have enough friends, you never have to pay again. The information for that is at twit.tv/clubtwit if you want to know more about that. You can also subscribe, and really that's the best way to get our shows, is subscribe in your favorite podcast client. Doesn't matter which one you use. You can choose from audio and video. Choose the one you prefer, and make sure you subscribe. That way you'll have Twit just in time for your Monday morning commute. Thank you all for being here. We will see you next week. Bye, Owen. Bye, Alex. And as I have always said for the last 20 years, another twit is in the can.